Tonight, I want you to imagine something. You're 30,000 feet in the sky, alone, even if you're surrounded by people, even if you think you're safe. Because the truth is, sometimes, the real horror doesn't begin until after takeoff. What follows are 13 of the most disturbing, true airplane encounters that have haunted the skies. Stories that come from pilots, passengers, flight attendants, and those who never made it back. These are not urban legends. These are the whispers from the black box, the things no airline wants to explain. The flight boarded just after midnight, and already the airport felt wrong, hollow, and humming, like it had been waiting for something that had finally arrived. I remember the way the gate agent looked at me, eyes too wide, smile too stiff. She scanned my boarding pass without a word, just nodded toward the jet bridge, like she was glad to be rid of me. I found my seat 13B, middle row, far back, where the cabin lights always seem a little too dim, and the air smells like old carpet and reheated fear. The man in the aisle seat was already there. He didn't look up when I slid past him, didn't move his legs, just kept staring out the window. Only, there wasn't a window. Just a blank wall panel where one should have been. I settled in, trying not to brush against him. His skin had that yellowish-gray tint you only ever see in old photographs or hospital beds. He wore a dark suit, neatly pressed but somehow ancient, like it had hung in a closet untouched for decades. His hands were folded in his lap, long fingers. Nails are a little too clean. He never blinked. I thought maybe he was sleeping with his eyes open, or maybe blind. But then, the plane shuddered, pulling back from the gate, and his lips moved. I couldn't hear what he said over the hum of the engines, but he spoke like he was answering someone, like someone had asked him a question. I looked around, but the row behind us was empty, the row ahead too. The cabin was quiet, too quiet for a full red eye. The flight attendant passed by, and I almost stopped her. I almost asked if the seat beside me was supposed to be empty, if this man had actually boarded. But she walked past without glancing our way, like our row wasn't there at all. Then, the man turned his head, just slightly, not to look at me, but to look past me, and under his breath, he whispered something. It was the sound of numbers, coordinates, spoken like a prayer or a warning. I woke with a start, my breath catching in the cold. Not the kind of chill you feel from air conditioning. No, this was deeper, a still, biting cold that felt like it had been waiting, like it had seeped in from somewhere it didn't belong. My arms were covered in goose flesh, and the windowless wall beside me had begun to sweat with condensation. Beads of it rolled down like tears. Everyone around me was asleep, heads tilted, mouths open, breath shallow and unnatural. Too still, too quiet. Not a single rustle of a magazine, not a single shift of weight. Just the low hum of the engines, like they were whispering something in reverse. He was still there beside me, the man in the aisle seat, still staring at the blank wall, unmoving, but now he was whispering. Lips barely parted, voice paper thin, like it was slipping out from some far-off, dust-covered room. I thought it might be Latin, or maybe just nonsense. But then I heard the shape of it, a rhythm, a repetition. 43 north, 72 west, over and over again. Coordinates. I didn't want to lean in closer. Every hair on my arms told me not to. But I did. He didn't blink, didn't look at me, just kept reciting. His lips were cracked now, flecked with blood, and his breath smelled like dust and earth and something long buried. There was something in his hand. I hadn't noticed it before. A crumpled piece of paper, clenched so tightly it looked like it had melted into his skin. Ink had bled through. A flight map. I could just make out the curve of the eastern seaboard. I turned toward the aisle to grab the attendant. But the cabin lights dimmed, and for a second, just a breath, the man vanished. I don't mean he moved. I mean he was gone. Like the seat beside me had always been empty. Like I'd never had anyone to lean toward in the first place. When the lights flickered back, he was there again, right where he'd been, still staring, still whispering. I needed to get away from him. I unbuckled slowly, like sudden movement might draw his attention. But he didn't flinch, didn't stop whispering, just kept repeating those numbers over and over, like he didn't even notice I was there. 43 north, 72 west. The aisle was darker than I remembered. The overhead lights flickered with a low hum, and the soft orange glow that should have lit the galley near the rear of the plane was gone entirely. It was just shadow now, cold and still. I pressed the call button above seat 31D as I passed it. No chime, no response. The curtain that separated the galley from the cabin had been drawn back, but no one was there. The carts were still, the coffee pots dry, and everything had that odd, undisturbed feeling like no one had touched anything in hours. I called out. Just once. My own voice felt strange in my ears. Too loud, too alone. The lavatory door creaked when I opened it. Inside, the mirror was fogged over, even though the air was frigid. I splashed cold water on my face, stared at my reflection, and felt a sudden dread bloom in my gut like I was being watched. Not from behind, from above. When I stepped back into the aisle, something had changed. The air felt thinner, the lights dimmer, the hum deeper. And when I returned to my seat, the man was gone. 13B was empty. The seatbelt lay buckled across the cushion, taut and undisturbed, like he'd never moved. But there was something else. A smear of blood on the armrest, dull and drying, like a thumbprint pressed down too hard. I reached out without thinking and touched it. It was cold. I looked around, but the passengers were still slumped in their seats, breathing slow and shallow, like sleepwalkers. No one had seen him leave. No one stirred. I sat down, slowly, my heart pounding. The coordinates still echoed in my head. 43 north, 72 west. I didn't know what was waiting there, but I knew that man hadn't just walked off the plane. He had been taken. I stared at the blood for what felt like minutes, waiting for it to vanish, waiting for him to come back. But the seat beside me remained empty, buckled, still and cold. I turned to the man in 13C, an older guy in a fleece jacket who'd been snoring softly since takeoff. I hadn't paid him much attention before, but now I needed someone else to see what I'd seen. Just someone to confirm he'd been there, that I wasn't losing my mind. "Hey," I said quietly, "do you remember the guy who was sitting next to me?" Tall man, dark suit, kind of pale. He blinked at me, slowly waking, then furrowed his brow like I was speaking another language. "What guy?" "In 13B, I said, pointing at the seat. "Right here. He was here when we boarded. He was whispering something. He's gone now." The man's confusion didn't fade. In fact, it deepened. "There was no one there," he said flatly. "That seat's been empty since takeoff." My throat went dry. I looked down at the smear again, hoping he'd notice it, acknowledge it. But his gaze passed right over it like it wasn't there. Like he wasn't there. Like none of it had happened. Then the intercom crackled. "This is your captain speaking," came a calm, tired voice. "We'll be landing in Denver shortly. Weather is clear, minus the fog." Fog. I turned to the window, or where the window should have been. Still just that blank, windowless panel. still cold. But I swear I saw movement in the reflection, not mine. Something behind me, pale, watching. I stood quickly, twisting to look down the aisle, but the rows behind were quiet. Still, everyone asleep or pretending to be. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. I sank back into my seat, pulse thudding in my ears. The captain's voice echoed again in my mind, minus the fog. But there was no fog forecasted, and we weren't descending. Not really. Outside, or whatever was outside, the world had gone dark. And I swear I heard whispering again, not in my ears, inside my head. The landing didn't feel real. No descent, no drop in altitude, just a sudden jolt, like waking from a nightmare, and the wheels were on the ground. We were taxiing to the gate, Denver signs blinking past the windows, but I never saw the runway, never felt the plane slow down. One moment we were drifting through a sky with no stars, and the next, here. People began to stir around me, stretching and unbuckling as if nothing had happened, as if we hadn't just crossed through something no one should ever fly through. I looked at 13B one last time, still empty, still buckled. But the blood was gone now, or maybe it never was there. The jet bridge connected, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and then everything stopped. 2 uniformed officers entered through the front. A third, plainclothes, wearing a marshal's badge, walked straight down the aisle like he knew exactly where I was sitting. His eyes locked onto mine. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He just said, "Come with me." I was too tired to argue, too numb. I followed him off the plane and into a waiting area where another officer held a printed manifest. My name was circled in red ink. They asked if I knew why they were there. I didn't. They asked again if I had spoken to anyone in 13B, if I saw anything, if I remembered anything strange. I asked what was going on. The older officer exchanged a glance with the marshal. Then he said, quiet and measured, "That seat was retired 5 years ago. There is no 13B anymore. The row exists, but the seat's not assigned. Not since the incident." "What incident?" I asked, throat tightening. "A man strangled a woman on a red-eye to Denver. Mid-flight. No motive. No warning. They found her in her seat. He was gone. Disappeared mid-air. No one saw him leave. No one saw him stand. Plane landed with 1 empty seat, and blood on the armrest." He looked at me for a long time, and that seat was 13B. I didn't respond. I couldn't, because I remembered the whispering, and I remembered the numbers, and I knew he wasn't gone. He was still flying. We took off just after 3 in the morning, wheels lifting from the frozen runway like they didn't want to leave. Flight Echo 76, a routine cargo job out of Anchorage, heading south over the mountains. No passengers, just sealed crates and frost-bitten silence. The captain was a quiet man, old school, liked his coffee black and his cockpit silent. He nodded off 20 minutes after takeoff, breathing slow, headset askew. I didn't mind. Night flights were my favorite. No chatter, no turbulence, just sky. The moon hung low behind the clouds, fat and heavy, like it had been waiting. Beneath us, nothing but black forest, white ridges, and miles of air that didn't belong to anyone. The altitude held steady, instruments clean, radios quiet, and yet, I couldn't shake it. That feeling, like someone else was in the cockpit with me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to catch movement just out of frame, a reflection, a shadow that shouldn't be there. But it was always empty, just the soft glow of gauges and the sleeping captain beside me. I leaned forward, adjusted a knob, and stared out into the dark. We were cutting across a patch of sky that felt wrong. I don't know how else to say it. It wasn't turbulence. It wasn't weather. It was more like the air itself had shifted, like we were gliding through a pocket of stillness that hadn't been touched in a long, long time. That's when I noticed the radio static. A soft, clicking pulse at the edge of the frequency, too low to trigger the squelch, too steady to be an accident. I reached out and turned the volume up, listening hard. Then I heard it, a woman's voice, thin, cracking. They are not who they say they are. That was all. Then silence. No call sign, no carrier wave. Just those words, floating up through the frequency like something half dead and waterlogged. I checked the transponder log. No aircraft within 200 miles. No emergencies. No distress calls. I looked over at the captain. Still asleep. Still breathing. But now his headset was pressed against his ear. And I swear he was smiling. At 4:23, the radio came alive again. I didn't touch anything. No knobs. No channels flipped. It just crackled once, sharp and clean, then opened wide like a mouth underwater. The woman's voice was back, closer this time. Still broken, still frayed at the edges like she was speaking through torn fabric, but I could make it out. They are not who they say they are. The words came slowly, like they were being dragged behind the signal. Then nothing. No follow-up, no call sign. Just the same static as before, soft and persistent, like wind through dry teeth. I stared at the panel, watching for any hint of origin. Nothing. Not even a blip on radar. I keyed the mic, requested identification. Silence. I checked the log. There were no aircraft anywhere near us. The closest traffic had passed 200 miles east, nearly an hour earlier, headed toward Juneau. Nothing else had entered our corridor since we left Anchorage. No emergencies, no errant pings, no ghosts. I looked at the captain again. He hadn't moved, still slumped, breathing evenly, lips parted just enough to show his teeth. His headset was hanging loose now, dangling down by his collar. The smile was gone, but something worse had taken its place, a kind of stillness I didn't like he wasn't just sleeping anymore. I tried to shake it off. Maybe a misrouted transmission, maybe a prank, but something about her tone, the way she said they, like she was talking about us. Not planes, not traffic, people. I tapped the gauge glass on the altimeter. Steady. I checked the compass. Still true. But the skin on my arms prickled, and my gut was twisting in knots. I turned the radio all the way down, thinking maybe I just needed quiet, a reset. But the static didn't fade, not completely. It kept whispering, low and slow beneath the threshold, and I swear I could still hear her. Not words anymore, just breath, heavy, wet, like she was inside the system, breathing against the wire. Somewhere, high above Alaska, we weren't alone, and whoever they were, they'd already boarded. I couldn't sit in that cockpit any longer. The static wouldn't stop whispering, and the captain hadn't moved in over 30 minutes. His face looked waxy now, like the color had drained from beneath his skin. Something was wrong. Not just with the equipment. Something inside the plane. I grabbed the flashlight and unlatched the bulkhead door. The pressure hissed like a sigh, stale and heavy. The narrow stairwell leading down into the cargo hold groaned under my boots. The sound echoed longer than it should have, like the plane had stretched behind me while I wasn't looking. The air was colder down there, metallic, and still, the cargo was strapped in tight. Steel crates. Government seals. Our manifest said it was medical inventory sealed units. Temperature controlled. Not to be opened in flight, all standard procedure. Nothing dangerous, nothing alive. But one of the crates was moving. It wasn't violent, just rhythmic. A slow, dull thump from the inside. Then another, like a hand or a heartbeat. I stepped closer, trying not to breathe too loud. My light flickered over the crate's surface. The label had been scratched, almost like something inside had clawed at it. The seal tape was still intact, mostly. I told myself to leave it. Walk away. Wake the captain. But my hand moved without asking, pulling the latch just slightly, just enough to break the airlock and crack the lid open an inch. Inside, darkness. But something blinked. Just once. A pale eye. Glossy and too large. It didn't move away from the light. Didn't flinch. It just stared, unblinking. Like it had been waiting for someone to look. I stepped back so hard I nearly fell. The lid snapped itself shut, hard enough to rattle the crate. The thumping stopped. I stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand, heart punching against my ribs, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, that it was a reflection, a trick of the light. But when I turned to leave, I saw something else. More crates, and every single one of them was breathing. I bolted back up the stairs 2 at a time, lungs burning with cold air, ears ringing with the echo of things I should not have seen. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't want to see if the crates were still breathing. The cockpit door groaned as I shoved it open. The captain hadn't moved, still slumped in his seat, head tilted just slightly toward the window, lips parted in that same half expression, something between sleep and silent awe. I called his name. Once, twice, louder. Nothing. I reached over and shook his shoulder. He didn't respond. His body shifted slightly with the motion, loose, too light somehow, like his bones had gone hollow. His eyes were open now, dry and unfocused, staring straight ahead, not blinking, not following. I pressed 2 fingers to his neck. A pulse, barely there, faint and slow, like something winding down. I leaned over and whispered, "Can you hear me?" Still nothing. That's when the temperature dropped again. Fast. The windows frosted at the edges, breath fogging the glass. My skin prickled. I turned toward the left window, half expecting to see stars or the flicker of moonlight over cloud cover. But what I saw instead made me freeze. Something was pacing us. Not a plane, not a bird, not anything that belonged in the sky. It was shaped like a person, tall, long-limbed, pale in the moonlight, but its form kept shifting at the edges, flickering like bad tape. No wings, no propulsion, just hovering. It moved alongside our cockpit window, keeping perfect speed with the aircraft. Head tilted toward us, like it was watching, studying, waiting. It had no face, just a smooth plane of skin where features should have been, and yet somehow it was smiling. I stepped back, hand instinctively reaching for the radio, but the static was back, louder now, deep and wet, like something crawling through wires. Then the figure raised one long finger and pointed, not at me, at the crates in the hold. I didn't want to know how it knew, but I understood what it meant. Open them, it seemed to say. Let them out. The rest of the flight passed in a haze. The thing in the clouds disappeared after a few minutes, fading back into the mist like it had never been there at all. But its presence clung to me, heavy in my chest, like something had crawled inside and refused to leave. I didn't go back down to the hold. I couldn't. I locked the hatch. I told myself it was to secure the cargo, but really, it was because I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd find, or what would be missing. The captain came to just before descent, blinked once, looked around like he had no idea where he was. He didn't speak, just flicked a few switches, made a textbook landing, and taxied to the private hangar like nothing had happened. When we touched down, it was still dark, no sunrise, no morning chatter, just silence and frost on the windows. But the tarmac wasn't empty. Security vehicles were already waiting, no sirens, no lights, just black SUVs and men in dark uniforms who moved with quiet precision. They didn't speak to us, just boarded the plane, scanned our badges, and told us to disembark immediately. I tried to explain what I'd seen. The voice, the eye in the crate, the figure outside the window. They told me to write it down, then told me to forget it. The hold was emptied within minutes. Crates removed, scanned, tagged. But when I looked over the manifest later that week, something hit me like a punch to the ribs. The crate with the eye wasn't listed. It had never been recorded, never weighed, never sealed. As far as the airline was concerned, it had never existed. The official report said we landed without incident, that the captain had suffered mild altitude sickness, that there were no abnormalities with the aircraft, that no other transmissions had been recorded. But the flight recorder? Gone. Wiped clean. Not corrupted. Missing. And the captain, when I saw him again, weeks later, he didn't remember a thing. Not the voice, not the flight, not even me. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear her voice. They are not who they say they are, and I know she wasn't talking about them. She was talking about us. We left New York just after 10 at night. Flight to Lisbon. Full cabin. Quiet crowd. The kind of overnight run where most people drift off to sleep before we even reach cruising altitude. I liked those flights, less noise, fewer problems, just you and the sky humming steady above the ocean. We were 3 hours in, maybe more, when the turbulence hit. It didn't come in waves. No warning bumps, no seatbelt sign. It was instant and violent, like something enormous had slammed into us mid-air. The cabin dropped hard, then twisted. The beverage cart lifted straight off the floor and smashed against the ceiling, bottles exploding, cans hissing open like they'd been punctured from the inside. I fell sideways, struck my shoulder on the galley door. Passengers screamed. Someone shouted, "Brace!" And then the lights went out. Not dimmed, not flickered. Gone. Total blackout. The engines howled this terrible mechanical shriek, like something grinding to a stop. Then came the worst sound of all. Nothing. Silence. Not the comforting kind. Not the peaceful kind. This silence was wrong. The kind that fills your ears and chest like water. No engine hum. No air circulation. Not even the creak of metal. Just stillness. I pushed myself upright in the dark. Heart pounding, hands slick with spilled soda, and something warm I prayed wasn't blood. My emergency training kicked in, but there was nothing to respond to. No fire, no smoke, no alarms. Just a cabin full of terrified faces caught in strobe-like flashes as lightning crawled silently across the windows. I looked outside, expecting to see clouds, stars, something, but the ocean was gone. Everything was. No moonlight, no reflection, just blackness. Like we were flying through ink or floating. One of the passengers, an older woman near row 28, started whispering something over and over. Her voice was soft but urgent, like she was reciting a prayer or trying to wake something up. She said we had left the sky. She said this place had no name and no way out. I didn't believe her. Not then, but I should have. I stood in the dark, gripping the edge of a seat, waiting for the engines to come back, for the lights to flicker on, for anything to remind me that we were still flying over the Atlantic and not somewhere else, somewhere we were never meant to go. But nothing returned. The silence pressed in from all sides. Not the quiet of a sleeping cabin, not the hush after turbulence. This was the kind of silence that lives under everything else. The kind that makes your ears ring because your brain doesn't know how to process the absence. Like the plane had been swallowed whole by the dark. I looked out the window again. Still nothing. No stars, no clouds, no ocean. Just an impossible, endless black so complete it didn't even reflect the cabin lights when they finally flickered once, then died for good. It was like staring into a dead screen, but it wasn't empty. I felt something watching. Not outside. From below. Like the black had depth and weight. The passengers weren't moving. A few had curled into themselves, clutching their armrests, eyes wide open but unfocused. I called out to a man in the exit row. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. That's when I noticed the sound, or rather, the lack of it. No one was breathing. No air rushing from the vents. No inhale or exhale. I placed my hand in front of my mouth. Nothing. No movement. I wasn't breathing either, but I wasn't suffocating. The air was simply gone. And yet, I was still alive. I walked toward the galley, stepping over shattered glass and crumpled cans. My footsteps made no sound on the floor. It was like the plane had been vacuum sealed inside this thing. A place between places, a crack in the sky. From the back of the cabin, the older woman began humming. It was tuneless, monotone, like a warning. I reached for the intercom, static, and under the static, a voice. It wasn't from the cockpit. It wasn't from the ground. It was from outside. A voice like wind scraping bone, whispering the same word over and over again. Descend. It started with a cough. Row 17, aisle seat. A dry, rasping sound, like someone clearing dust from their throat. Then another, then another. One by one, passengers began to stir, not fully waking, just twitching in their seats, jerking like marionettes pulled by invisible strings. I turned to check on the man nearest me, a middle-aged guy with a blanket wrapped tight around his chest. His head lifted slowly, not groggily, not like someone shaking off sleep. It was deliberate, like he was being summoned. His eyes were wide open and bleeding. Thin, steady streams of red rolled from the corners, trailing down his cheeks in perfect symmetry. He didn't flinch, didn't wipe them away. He just stared straight ahead, smiling with teeth that didn't look like his. Too many of them, too sharp. Then, he whispered something, a word I didn't recognize, not English, not anything I'd ever heard, but it made the hair on my arms rise like ice water. Then the man beside him repeated it, and the woman across the aisle, and then a chorus of voices began to rise around me, row after row, whispering in unison. All bleeding, all smiling, all chanting this thing, this language, that made no earthly sense and yet vibrated deep in my bones. I backed away, stumbling toward the rear of the cabin, bumping shoulders with a man who grabbed my arm and grinned, mouth opening wide enough to tear at the corners. His breath was cold and smelled like copper and soil. Then, from the front of the plane, came the sound that broke me. A baby, laughing. Not the joyful, innocent kind of laugh you expect from a child. It was dry, thin, brittle, like old paper tearing. The baby's head lolled over the side of the bassinet, eyes milky and white, mouth pulled into a twitching grin. It laughed again, louder this time, and the passengers answered it, chanting louder, faster, as if it were some kind of god and they were its choir. I screamed for the cockpit, but the curtain was already open, and the captain was standing in the aisle, bleeding from his eyes, smiling, and whispering that same impossible word. I ran for the cockpit, shoving past passengers who were no longer passengers. Their heads turned in perfect sync as I passed, mouths twitching with crooked smiles, lips shaping that same pulsing word, low and guttural, like it had been dug up from beneath the earth. Their eyes followed me, red-streaked, empty, worshipful. The cockpit door should have been locked. That was protocol. But it was wide open. I stepped inside. No one was there. The seats sat perfectly upright, belts still buckled, controls untouched, not a single light on the panel flashing. The instruments were fine, altitude steady, course unchanged. The plane was flying itself. I called out. Once. Nothing. The air in the cockpit was different, thinner, stale, the kind of stillness you find in sealed tombs. I moved forward slowly, brushing my fingers over the captain's chair. It was cold, too cold. The headset was resting gently on the panel. One earpiece cracked like it had been dropped from a great height. There was no sign of struggle, no spilled coffee, no notes. Just two empty chairs in the sky outside, still black, still starless, stretching on forever. And then, the intercom clicked on. It crackled softly, like someone dragging a finger across dead vinyl. A voice came through. Not the captain, not the first officer. Something else. Low, calm, wrong. We are almost home. That was all. It didn't sound electronic. It didn't sound human. It sounded ancient, like it had been waiting in the static for years, decades, maybe longer, just biding its time until the right flight crossed the right patch of sky. I backed out of the cockpit, heart slamming in my chest. The voice still echoed through the cabin. We are almost home. Over and over. The lights flickered. The passengers began to rise in their seats, slowly, their arms hanging limp, faces turned toward the ceiling. I ran back toward the galley, but every row was watching me now. They moved in sync, whispering, smiling, not breathing, not blinking. And somewhere far below us, in the dark, something was pulling us closer. We touched down just after dawn, smooth landing, flaps deployed, wheels kissed the runway like it was just another uneventful overnight. The sky was pale and clear, a soft haze over the Lisbon horizon, and for a moment, it almost felt like none of it had happened. Like the darkness, the whispers, the bleeding eyes, it had all been some shared hallucination, a fever dream at 37,000 feet. The passengers disembarked in silence, not tired, not relieved, just empty. Some of them blinked against the light like they'd forgotten what the sun looked like. Others didn't blink at all. I saw a man from row 12 touch his face and look down at his fingers like he didn't recognize them. One woman had to be helped off by airport staff. Her nose had bled down the front of her blouse. She didn't speak, just kept humming the same flat note over and over, lips trembling, eyes glassy. In total, 23 passengers had nosebleeds. Another, an older man I had spoken to just before takeoff, was found in the lavatory after everyone else had disembarked. He had gouged out his own eyes with his thumbs. He didn't remember doing it, didn't remember the flight, didn't remember me. I tried to file a report, but the ground crew just smiled and handed me a clipboard. The incident log was blank. The maintenance report marked no irregularities. Cabin pressure? Normal. Engines? Clean. Weather? Clear. Flight duration? 3 hours and 21 minutes. Exactly what it should have been. Except it wasn't. I pulled the flight data from the terminal screen, scrolled down, and froze. The departure log listed our gate, our aircraft ID, and our intended destination. But next to departure time, it said 0 hours. And next to origin, it didn't say New York. It didn't say anything. Just 3 dashes where the airport code should have been. Blank space, as if we hadn't taken off from anywhere at all. Later, when I accessed the digital logs, the records showed we never left the gate, that the plane had remained grounded in New York for the entire night. But I was there. I was in the sky, and something else was in the sky with us. And whatever it was, it knew my name. It was supposed to be a simple flight, Dallas to Phoenix, in and out, no delays, no weather, the kind of quick hop where you don't even take off your shoes. I was seated in the very back, near the lavatories, squeezed into a window seat with a stiff neck and lukewarm coffee in my hand. The engines had just started to spool up when I heard it, a soft scratching. It came from the overhead bin just above seat 24A, across the aisle and 1 row ahead of me. Quick, twitchy little movements, like fingernails on plastic. I looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. People were still stowing bags, flipping through magazines, ignoring the safety demonstration. I flagged a flight attendant as she passed. She leaned in, smiling too wide, tired eyes behind perfect makeup. "There's something moving up there," I whispered, pointing toward the bin. She followed my gaze, then gave a little shrug. "Probably a loose zipper or an overpacked backpack. Happens all the time." The scratching came again. Louder this time. More frantic. She paused just a second longer than she should have, then forced another smile. "If it keeps up after takeoff, I'll take a look. Promise." She didn't. Once we were in the air, she vanished behind the curtain. Drink service began, then stopped. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except the scratching never did stop. It grew more deliberate, more rhythmic, like something pacing inside that tiny compartment, like it knew it was trapped, and it didn't like it. I watched the bin. I couldn't stop watching it. And just when I thought, maybe it really was just a broken latch or an unlucky suitcase, the latch moved, not a full open, just a twitch. Then again, the plastic lip trembled, like something inside was pressing against it. I leaned forward, heart thudding in my throat, and I swear to you, I heard breathing, light and quick and ragged. Then a voice, small, a child's. "It's too dark in here." My blood went cold, because no one on that flight had checked in with a child, and the bin wasn't big enough for a person, at least, not a living one. By the time we were halfway to Phoenix, the scratching had changed. It wasn't frantic anymore. It wasn't scared. It was patient. It would stop for a few minutes, then start again, soft at first, then louder, deliberate, like a child tapping their fingernails along a wall to get attention. It had a rhythm now. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more, a kind of twisted lullaby, playful and strange. I couldn't take my eyes off the bin. Seat 24A was still empty. No one had claimed it, and the compartment above it remained closed, the latch still twitching every so often, like it was breathing. The lights dimmed for cabin rest. Passengers were dozing, wrapped in blankets, soft snores blending with the hum of the engines. I sat there, staring at the overhead, trying to convince myself it was nothing. A loose latch, a weird echo. But then I heard it again. Knock, 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 pause. Then the voice, "Please," whispered, soft. So close I almost thought it had come from inside my seat back. That was it. I stood up, heart pounding, palms damp. I reached for the bin and wrapped my fingers around the handle. It was cold, much colder than the surrounding plastic, like it had been sitting in ice. The knocking stopped. Everyone around me was asleep. No heads turned, no one stirred. I opened it, slowly, expecting to see eyes, fingers, something folded in the dark. smiling at me. But it was empty. Completely. No bags, no jackets, no loose backpack with an open zipper. Nothing. Just dark, smooth plastic, and the echo of my own breath catching in my throat. I stood there for a moment, frozen, waiting for the joke, the scream, the thing to leap out at me. But the bin remained hollow, lifeless. I closed it and sat back down, trying to steady my breathing. And that's when I noticed it. The seat in front of me, the one at 24A, was reclined just slightly more than it had been. The window shade was open now, and pressed against the glass from the outside was the faint outline of a hand, too small to be an adult's, too pale to be alive. The bin clicked shut, and that's when I heard it soft, right behind my ear. A giggle, light and quick, like a child trying not to laugh too loud during a game of hide and seek. Then a voice, small, sweet. "Don't tell." I spun around, but there was no one there. The aisle behind me was empty. The other passengers were still asleep or pretending to be. One woman nearby stirred slightly, but her eyes stayed closed. Her lips were moving, though whispering something under her breath I couldn't quite make out. I turned back toward the overhead, half expecting it to be wide open again. But it was still closed, perfectly latched. I pressed a hand against it, warm now, like something breathing had just been there. I sat down, trying not to panic, trying not to look at seat 24A, even though I could feel it watching me. That open window, that handprint. I closed my eyes, just for a second, tried to breathe, tried to think. Then came the sound again, from inside the bin. Not scratching, not knocking, shifting, something moving slowly. Soft rustles, like small limbs unfolding, like knees pulling into a chest, a shuffle of skin against nylon, and breathing, so faint I could barely hear it over the hum of the engines. I reached for the call button, but my hand froze before it made contact. Because I heard it again. "Don't tell." Not whispered this time. Spoken, clear and close, like it had crawled out of the bin and was right behind me. I turned, a heart pounding. Nothing, but the air had changed. The lights above, seat 24, flickered once, then dimmed. The shadows in the corners of the cabin looked darker than they should have, like they had weight, like they were waiting. I looked down and realized something that made my skin crawl. There was a tiny handprint on my tray table, not pressed into dust, pressed into condensation, like breath, or sweat, or something trying to hold on. I couldn't take it anymore. I turned to the man beside me, tapped his arm, and asked softly, "Do you hear it too?" He blinked at me, groggy, confused, shook his head. "Hear what?" "The scratching," I said. "From the overhead bin. The voice." He gave me a polite, uncomfortable smile and went back to pretending to sleep. The woman in seat 24A looked over her shoulder, sensing the tension. I asked her the same thing. If she'd noticed anything strange, a sound, a movement, maybe a child nearby. She frowned. "There hasn't been anyone near me the whole flight. That bin's been shut since boarding. No bags in it either. Empty. Empty." I stared at the latch again. It hadn't moved since the last time I closed it, but I could still feel the echo of breath on the back of my neck. That sense of presence, like something just out of sight was watching me, smiling. That's when the flight attendant came back, the same one I'd spoken to before takeoff. Her face was pale now, her mascara faintly smudged, as if she hadn't blinked in a while. I flagged her down again, more desperate this time. "There's something in that bin," I said. "I heard it. Something moving. Something breathing." She glanced around, saw the passengers still asleep or pretending, saw the growing fear in my eyes, and nodded. "All right," she said gently. "Let's take a look." She stepped over to the bin, reached up, and placed both hands on the latch. Her fingers hovered there for a moment too long. She didn't want to open it either, but she did. Slowly, with a soft click, the bin unlatched and the door lowered. Then she screamed. Loud, sharp, real. She stumbled backward into the aisle, hand over her mouth, eyes locked on the inside of the compartment. I stood and looked too, and that's when I saw it. Inside the bin, crumpled and folded like laundry, was a small figure, knees pulled to its chest, eyes wide and glassy, skin pale and sagging like old wax. Its lips were moving, but the voice came from behind me. "Don't tell," it said again. Then it giggled. The scream drew everyone's attention. People sat up, heads turned, blank stares slowly sharpening into fear as they watched the flight attendant collapse into the aisle, hands trembling, her voice rising into broken, gasping sobs. The marshal appeared seconds later. I hadn't even realized there was one on board, but suddenly he was there, calm and heavy-shouldered, kneeling beside her. She was hysterical. I could hear her between sobs, repeating it over and over. He had no eyes. He was smiling at me. You didn't see he was grinning. The marshal looked up at me, and there was something in his expression I didn't expect. He believed her. He didn't say it. He didn't have to. He just tightened his grip, nodded toward the curtain, and helped guide her into the galley. Someone else, another attendant, snapped the bin shut without a word. The latch clacked closed, and just like that, the flight returned to silence. When we landed, there was no announcement, no report, no delay. They took her off first, head down, arms pinned by 2 staff members like she was dangerous. Passengers whispered. Some looked away. A few asked questions. No one got answers. I stayed back, last to leave. When I passed 24A, the overhead bin was still closed. The seat was empty, and on the window, the handprint was gone. The crew said she'd had a breakdown, that it was stress, altitude, fatigue, that there had been no sound, no disturbance, nothing at all in the overhead bin. I asked again. They smiled and said I must be tired, must be imagining things. But I remembered what I saw and what I heard. Later that night, I pulled up the FAA database, searched by tail number, just to prove to myself it was all nothing, that this was still a world where things made sense. But buried deep in the records, under special transport history, I found it. That same aircraft, same model, same serial tag. 3 years ago, it had been used for a delayed repatriation case. An unaccompanied minor, male, 7 years old. He'd suffocated, inside a suitcase, left alone in an overhead bin, seat 24A. He was never claimed, and now, when the cabin lights go dim, he whispers one thing to anyone who listens. Don't tell. And he always smiles. Most people don't know this, but the black box isn't just one recorder. It's 2. One tracks data altitude, airspeed, heading. The other captures sound. Every click, every warning tone, every final word spoken before impact. I work for the National Transportation Safety Board. I sit in a quiet room and listen to the last seconds of people's lives. That's my job. To piece together what went wrong, why the plane went down, who said what, when the screaming started, when it stopped. The charter flight in question went down over the Nevada desert in the summer of 1992. 8 souls on board. Private jet, no survivors. Nothing about it was especially unusual, until I got to the audio. The voice recorder had cut out exactly 10 minutes before the crash. Hard stop. No static, no failure warning, just silence. That happens sometimes. Wiring gets fried, impact corrupts the files. But this one shouldn't have failed. It had been updated 6 months prior, and the crash hadn't been violent enough to destroy the housing, not from what we could tell. Still, it was gone. But the backup system? It had picked up something else, a secondary channel, buried in the metadata, not the cockpit mic, not cabin ambient. Something deeper, like it had been coming from inside the system itself. I played it. What I heard wasn't a voice. Not at first. It was breathing, shallow, close to the mic, rhythmic, like someone crouched in a small, sealed space. Then a noise, clicking, wet, deliberate clicks, like a tongue tapping teeth. And then, finally, a voice, low, male, calm, and completely out of place. It said, "They see us now." Then silence. No screaming, no alarms, no final descent. Just that one line. "They see us now." I checked every channel, every frequency. No other transmissions. The pilots never said a word about losing altitude, never called for help. Nothing from air traffic control. And the weirdest part? The data recorder, the one that logs every system input, also stopped at the exact same moment. The flight didn't descend. It just disappeared. Right there, in the middle of level flight. Like something stepped in and pulled it out of the sky. I kept listening. The breathing cut out, replaced by a crackle like old vinyl, warped and uneven. The kind of noise you get from a microphone picking up sound it shouldn't, something that doesn't belong in a black box at all. Then the voice returned. But this time, it wasn't the same one. A woman. Screaming. Not panicked like a passenger mid-crash. It wasn't that sharp, instinctual fear. This was deeper pleading, begging. Her words were broken, gasped between sobs. "Please," she said, "don't leave me here. I'm still alive. Please. You don't have to please." Her voice cut through everything. But there was a problem. There was no woman like that on the manifest. Not on the flight crew. Not in the cabin. No passengers even close in age or vocal profile. I ran the voice through every filter we had. There was no match. I listened again, and this time, the woman's voice wasn't alone. A man responded flat, steady, emotionless. It was the co-pilot. His voice matched the crew records exactly. "She's still in the fuselage," he said. "We can't bring her with us." Another voice came next, muffled, almost like it was whispering through the static. "Door is open." I froze. The transcript showed no door had opened in flight. Cabin pressure remained stable. There was no emergency exit triggered. The aircraft had maintained altitude until its final moment. But that voice, "Door is open," sounded final. I scrubbed forward in the recording, but there was no impact sound. No alert, no collision with terrain, just more static, rising into something that almost sounded like laughter, distorted, hollow, mocking. And buried beneath it, for just a moment, I could still hear the woman, her voice trailing off into a whimper. "I can see you," she said. It wasn't clear if she was talking to the crew or to me. I stopped the tape. I've listened to hundreds of crash recordings. I've heard the last seconds of entire families. Screams, sobs, prayers whispered into headsets. But I've never heard anything like that. Because according to the official records, that woman, she never existed. But someone left her behind. I returned to the file the next morning, told myself maybe I'd misheard. Maybe the stress was getting to me. Long hours, too many wrecks, too many voices that never expected to be heard again. I hit play. At first, just static. Like the recorder had picked up emptiness, a sound with weight. After about 30 seconds, the tone shifted. Scratching, soft, like fingernails over metal. Not frantic, not desperate, almost rhythmic. A pattern, like someone counting time in the dark. Then she came back. That same woman's voice, no mistaking it. It was quieter now, flat, like the hope had drained from her throat, leaving only a whisper. "I told you not to come this way." She paused. I held my breath. "I told you this air was cursed." I backed up the audio, listened again. Same exact phrase, same unsteady cadence, like it had been repeated 1,000 times already. Her voice was cracked, dry, as if she'd been whispering into that recorder long after the others were gone. I checked the timestamp. It was after the supposed time of impact. According to the flight data, that jet had already crashed. 8 fatalities, instant. So how was her voice still being recorded? I opened the spectrum analyzer and froze. The sound levels weren't coming from the mic inside the black box. They were being pulled in from somewhere else. Somewhere above the aircraft, as if the recorder had tuned into a signal not meant for human ears. I ran a comparison against known frequencies. Nothing matched. But one of my older colleagues, he'd been listening from his own desk, leaned over and asked me to play it again. He didn't blink while it played, didn't breathe. When it ended, he said only one thing: "She's not talking to the crew." I stared at him. "Then who?" He didn't answer. But before he walked away, he muttered something I can't forget. Same voice came through on Flight 113. I paused. That flight went down in 1971, and the black box on that wreck had never been recovered. I went back to the audio, this time with the filters off. Just raw sound. I slowed the playback, stretched each second into 5, and let the waveform unfold into something deeper, beneath the static, beneath the woman's voice. That's where I heard it. Not a voice, breathing, but not human. It didn't rise and fall like lungs. There was no rhythm, no inhale, no exhale. Just this wet, bubbling rattle like something thick was shifting in a throat that hadn't swallowed in decades. Like lungs filled with seawater and rot, dragging in something heavier than air. I boosted the signal. The breathing came through clearer, not closer, deeper. Like it was coming from below the tape, from under the wreckage, under the earth, maybe under the sky itself. Something old, something buried. Then the woman's voice again. But this time, she wasn't pleading. She was whispering, like she was trying not to be heard. It waits for the quiet ones. I felt the chill crawl up my back. She wasn't talking to the crew. She wasn't even talking to herself. She was warning someone. Me. I isolated the track again, layered her voice over the breathing, and found something else hidden just beneath them both. A pattern. A tone that rose and fell every 13 seconds. Not a beep, not a machine. A chant. Too faint to make out the words. But the cadence was unmistakable. A litany. Something repeated. I ran it through every program I had. No known language. No transmission ID. But it matched one thing buried in the NTSB archives, a signal recorded off the coast of Japan in 1968, just before the disappearance of Flight 774. That flight was never found. I sat there, listening to the breathing loop, and realized something I hadn't before. It wasn't background noise. It was listening. Every time the tape paused, every time the signal dipped, I could hear it adjusting, focusing, like a predator catching a scent. And just before the audio cut out for good, I heard the woman speak one last time, her voice barely above the hiss. "It heard you too. That aircraft was never found. No fuselage, no tail section. Just fragments, small shards of metal scattered across a radius too wide, too deliberate, as if something had peeled the jet apart in midair and left only scraps." The terrain in that part of Nevada was scrubland, flat. Nothing for miles but cracked rock and salt. There was no reason they shouldn't have recovered more. But they didn't. Just one half-melted turbine and the black box. And now the tape is gone. I didn't tell anyone what I'd found at first. I saved copies, labeled them quietly, buried them inside deep folders on an offline drive. But 1 week later, it vanished. Not erased, removed. Physically, my backups, gone. My workstation wiped. The database entry that held the secondary transmission no longer exists. When I filed a request to restore the data, I was told the case had been reassigned. When I asked who had reassigned it, I was told there was no record of that case ever being opened. But I remember every second. I remember the chant, the breathing, and I remember her voice. I hear it all the time now. Not through speakers, not through any machine. In the quiet moments, between phone calls, behind the hum of the printer, when the lights flicker in the hallway or the elevator pauses for just 1 second too long between floors, I hear her. Soft, almost kind. "You were never supposed to fly here." It doesn't sound like a warning anymore. It sounds like a rule, like something ancient, written in the sky before maps and compasses and wings. A boundary we were never meant to cross, a place we were never meant to see. And now that we have, I think it's watching. Not the woman, not the crew, not even whatever made that breathing sound. Something else, something older than flight. And every time I close my eyes, I see the cloudless sky, the flat stretch of desert, and the hole where that plane should have been. I see it waiting there, open, patient, calling to the next one. I always pick the window seat. I like to watch the takeoff, the tilt, the ground falling away, the streets turning into veins of light. There's something soothing about seeing the world shrink beneath you. But this time, it didn't shrink. It vanished. We took off normally. A little delay on the tarmac, a brief apology from the captain. It was a late flight just after midnight. Most passengers had already drifted into that pre-sleep fog. I was wide awake, face to the glass, waiting for the view to open up. And then, nothing. No city, no clouds, no stars. Just a color I can't quite describe. Not black, not gray, something like wet cement underwater. Depthless, smothering. I blinked, leaned closer to the window, rubbed the glass with my sleeve, thinking maybe there was condensation. But the void outside didn't waver. That's when the man beside me spoke for the first time. "You see it too, don't you?" His voice was calm, too calm, like he'd been waiting for me to notice. I turned to him slowly. He hadn't moved the whole flight. Mid-60s, maybe. Wrinkled suit, hands clasped over his lap like he was praying. "What do you mean?" I asked, even though I already knew. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring at the window. At my window. "I thought I'd imagined it," he said. "The first time." I frowned. "The first time?" He looked at me then. His eyes were pale and bloodshot, like he hadn't slept in years. Not hours, years. "You shouldn't have looked," he whispered. "That's how it knows." A shiver ran through me. Knows what? But he just turned back to the glass. I looked too. Still nothing. Still that thick, endless gray. But for the first time, I had the unmistakable sensation that something on the other side was looking back. About an hour passed, or at least, I think it did. Time felt soft, like it was bending. People began shifting in their seats. The silence outside had crept into the cabin. No hum from the engines, no vibration. Just the low murmur of passengers asking quiet questions with no answers. A baby whimpered, then stopped. Not cried, stopped, like someone had turned off the sound. I looked again. Still, the void outside. Still that awful, bloated gray. The man next to me hadn't moved. A flight attendant came down the aisle with practiced ease, but I noticed the stiffness in her steps. A little too fast, a little too forced. She paused to speak with another crew member near the galley. I leaned slightly, pretending to adjust my air vent, just to listen. She was whispering. Tight, controlled, trying not to be overheard. He's not listening to us. He locked the cockpit door hours ago. The other attendant stiffened. You tried the override? Nothing. No comms either. Passenger manifest? He's not on it. I froze. Not on it? They both glanced back toward the front of the plane, toward the sealed cockpit, the one no one had seen open since takeoff. Then something clicked in my mind, the announcement. We never got one. No welcome, no cruising altitude, no weather forecast. Just silence, like the plane had launched itself. I turned to the man beside me. His hands were trembling now. His lips moved silently, praying again, or repeating something, maybe both. What's going on? I asked him. He didn't look at me, but he whispered something so quietly I barely caught it. It's not a plane anymore. I asked what he meant, but he only shook his head, jaw clenched tight. He was crying now, silent tears streaking down skin like paper. Far up ahead, someone pressed the call button. Then another, then 5 more. No one came. And when the intercom finally crackled to life, it wasn't a voice. It was breathing. Low, wet, close, like something was crawling into the wires. I kept my eyes on the window, even though everything in me screamed not to. The outside hadn't changed. Still that endless gray fog, thick and void of motion. But now, something else was wrong. The reflection didn't match me. At first it was subtle. My head tilted, but the reflection lagged behind, like it needed a moment to copy me. Then, as I tested it, turning left, right, blinking, the delay grew worse. A half second, then a full second. Then, it blinked when I didn't. I felt my throat tighten. Its smile came next. Wide. Wrong. Too many teeth. I flinched, pulling away from the window like it was hot. My pulse hammered in my ears. That's when one of the flight attendants passed by. She was younger, maybe early 20s, with tired eyes and a name tag that had been scratched too many times to read. She saw the look on my face and leaned in like she was just checking on my seatbelt. "Don't look at it," she whispered. Her breath smelled like iron. "Don't acknowledge it. That's how it knows you're awake." My mouth opened, but no words came. She didn't wait for questions. She moved on, brisk and silent, eyes never quite meeting mine again. I glanced back at the window. My reflection was gone. Just the seat, empty, like I wasn't even there. A man across the aisle was watching me now. He had his phone out, screen open to the camera. He was holding it like a mirror, angled toward his own window. I watched his expression melt. His lips quivered. He began to shake. Then, without warning, he stood up, walked calmly to the emergency exit, and pulled the handle. Nothing happened. No rush of wind, no pressure loss. Just the sound of metal sliding, and then silence. He stared out into the void like he'd found the answer to every question he'd ever had. Then he stepped through. The door closed behind him. No alarms. No reaction. Just that awful gray swallowing, and him whole. They said we were preparing to land, but the view outside never changed. Still that thick, featureless gray. No skyline, no clouds, no sun. The pilot never spoke. There was no descent. Just a soft bump, as if we'd settled onto something without ever moving down. Ground crews came on board immediately, but they weren't in uniforms. No airline logos. Just pale jumpsuits and plastic gloves. They moved through the cabin without looking at any of us. They didn't speak. They just checked seats, counted rows, scanned our faces like they were looking for something or someone. They took the flight crew aside. No explanations. We were escorted off in silence. No customs, no announcements, no airport I recognized. Everything was dim. Like the lighting had been pulled back just enough to make shadows too long. I asked about the man who'd opened the emergency door, the one who had stepped into the sky like he knew the way. The woman at the desk didn't look up from her clipboard. She just said, "He was found." I asked where. "In the cargo hold." Sleeping, curled up like a child. I pressed for more, and she finally glanced up. Her eyes were so tired they looked bruised. Her voice dropped low, almost a whisper. He was lying on a body bag. I waited, with his name tag on it. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. They let us go without screening. No one asked for ID. Just let us walk out into some place that didn't smell like jet fuel or concrete. The sky overhead was still that same choking gray. I never saw the man again. But sometimes, when I try to sleep, I hear something scratching under the floorboards of my room. Rhythmic, slow, like fingernails on canvas. And I swear, sometimes, I see my reflection blink a second too late. I woke up on the tarmac. No terminal, no plane, just open air and a concrete field stretching into nothing. The sky was blue now, not that suffocating gray. Sunlight on my skin, warm and wrong, like it didn't belong here. My clothes were damp, like I'd been sweating through a nightmare. My hands were shaking. My watch was gone. So was my boarding pass. When I stumbled toward the nearest building, a control shack, maybe I found 2 gate agents standing just inside. They looked up as I approached. Startled, one of them reached for a phone. I asked them what airport this was. They wouldn't tell me at first, just kept glancing at each other like I was some stray animal that had wandered in from the woods. I said I had been on a flight, a red-eye, window seat, middle row. I described the crew, the cabin, even the man beside me. They said no such flight was logged, no arrivals, no passenger records, no ticket in my name. I pulled up my phone to show them the confirmation email. The screen was blank. No history, no messages. My camera roll was gone, replaced by a single photo. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was a picture of me, sitting in that same window seat, eyes open, but wrong, too wide, too still, and the smile crooked, sharp. Not mine. Behind the glass, just barely visible in the curve of the window, was a dark figure, a reflection, watching me, smiling too. I've tried to tell myself it was a glitch, some kind of hallucination, stress, fatigue, but I still see that window in my dreams, that pale sky, thick like smoke. The man who warned me not to look, the girl who whispered, "That's how it knows." I still see me too, the version that never left, still seated, still smiling, still watching me sleep from the other side of the glass. It was pre-flight, early morning, still dark outside the hangar lights. I was alone on the aircraft, walking the aisle from back to front, doing my usual check. Systems were cold, lights dim, no one else on board yet. I moved row by row, verifying seatbacks, tray tables, belts, standard procedure. But when I reached row 21, I froze. The aisle seat was unbuckled as I passed. I know that for certain. I always check the belts first. But when I turned back for one last sweep, just a glance, the seatbelt was buckled. Not hanging loosely. Not halfway. Fully clicked in. Pulled tight. I stopped breathing. Looked over my shoulder. No one. I bent down. Ran my fingers across the belt. Still warm. I didn't want to call maintenance. They'd laugh. Mark it down as phantom buckle and move on. But I could feel something in that seat. A pressure, like it wasn't empty. Like whoever had buckled that belt was still there, just out of phase. Just invisible. I leaned in closer. It smelled like metal, like old copper and burnt plastic. Not fuel, not the typical cabin odor. This was something older, wrong. I unbuckled the seatbelt and stepped back. It buckled itself again. The click echoed, loud, sharp. A final note in an empty concert hall. I left the cabin without finishing my check. Told the lead it was clear. I lied. Later, I stood on the tarmac as the crew boarded. A new pilot stepped in behind me, yawning, smiling. I asked him, quietly, "Do you believe in residual energy? That kind of thing?" He laughed. "This old metal's soaked in ghosts," he said. "Why? Seat 21 giving you trouble again?" "Again?" I asked. He just smiled wider. "That's why they don't assign it anymore." But I had just seen it on the manifest. Passenger assigned. Name and all. I looked back up at the door, just as it sealed shut. The cabin lights blinked once, twice, then held steady. That seat was not supposed to be occupied, but something had buckled in anyway. The flight was halfway to Seattle. Smooth air, clear skies, the kind of ride pilots pray for. I wasn't at the controls this time. I had jump-seated myself on board for crew repositioning. Row 21 was two behind me. Aisle side. I didn't look at it. I didn't want to, but I kept feeling it. That subtle pressure, like being watched from the side of your vision. Not aggressive, just present. Then, the air shifted, a little cooler, denser, like someone had cracked a door to another room. And I heard it, that slight creak of fabric stretching like weight settling into a cushion. I turned my head. The seat was sinking, not all at once, slowly, as if someone was easing down into it. The cushion compressed, dipped, curved inward beneath invisible thighs. My throat tightened. I could see the fabric reacting, responding. Then the armrest moved, lifted, paused, dropped. I swear on everything I've ever known. The seat was empty. I checked again and again. No shadow, no outline. Just that depression, that undeniable indentation where no person sat. The flight attendant walked by and paused as well. Her eyes flicked to the seat. She didn't say a word, but her face, she knew. She felt it too. I whispered, "You see it?" She hesitated, then leaned in, so close I could smell the gum on her breath. "You didn't touch the seatbelt before takeoff, did you?" I shook my head. She whispered, "Good," and walked away fast. A few rows ahead, a baby started crying. Not a fussy whimper, full screaming, like it had seen something it couldn't understand. The mother tried to calm it, but the child was clawing at her chest, trying to turn around to look behind. I didn't turn around, but I knew where that baby was pointing. I closed my eyes, counted to 10, and when I opened them, the seat was empty again. The cushion flat, the armrest still, but the seatbelt buckled tight, pulled flat, like something wanted to make sure it didn't fall out. About 40 minutes from descent, I stood up. I couldn't take it anymore. That pressure behind me, the feeling that whatever was in that seat had leaned forward, was breathing on my neck. I needed distance. I moved toward the galley, just to stand, just to breathe. But as I turned into the aisle, something caught my eye. The cockpit door, sealed during flight. Always. It was open, not ajar, not swinging, fully open, like someone had walked through it and forgot to shut it behind them. I waited for someone to emerge. A voice, a laugh, a curse, anything. Nothing came out. The lights in the galley flickered. Once, twice, and then the first alarm screamed. Cabin pressurization. A glitch maybe, but we weren't losing altitude. We weren't banking. The co-pilot's voice came over the intercom, tight, rushed, forced calm. He said they were running diagnostics, nothing to worry about. But I saw him, through the open cockpit door. He was white as a sheet. The pilot was gripping the controls with both hands, muttering to himself, not talking into the headset, just whispering. Then the door began to close. Slow. Like someone was pulling it shut from the inside. But no one had entered. No one. And yet it latched, clicked, sealed. The alarm stopped. One of the flight attendants bolted toward the front. I saw her glance at seat 21 as she passed. Her step hitched. Just for a moment, she kept walking. A second later, a second alarm. This one, deeper, mechanical, started to howl. The cabin lights dimmed to emergency mode. Passengers stirred. One woman gasped. Another began to cry. And from the far end of the cabin, I heard a low scraping sound, like a shoe, dragging slowly up the aisle. The curtain at the back swayed, not like it was pushed, like it had ducked something. I turned to the seat, just for a second, and the armrest was up again, the buckle hanging loose, as if something had just gotten up and was walking toward the front. After landing, I stayed behind. I told the gate agent I had forgotten something. I needed to see that seat again. Needed to make sure it was just my mind. That the weight, the movement, the smell, the buckle, all of it had some rational explanation. The cabin was empty. Lights dimmed for turnaround. I moved to row 21. The cushion was still depressed, the belt still buckled. I touched the armrest. It was warm. That was when a teenager approached from behind, holding her phone. "You were watching it too, right?" she asked. Her voice trembled, but she forced a smile. "I recorded it. During the turbulence. I thought I was filming the lightning out the window, but it caught something else." She opened the video. Shaky footage, overhead lights flickering, a blur of heads, tray tables, and then the camera panned down the aisle. Just for a moment, just long enough. There, row 21. A figure, gray, faint, barely more than static, shaped like a person, sitting upright in the seat, buckled in. Its face was wrong, not blurry, twisted, smoothed in places, like melted wax, a hollow where the mouth should be, sunken sockets where the eyes never were, the shape of a pilot's uniform, but frayed, threadbare. It lasted 3 frames, then it was gone. The seat was empty again, the buckle loose, but the timestamp proved it. That thing had been there. I asked her if she showed it to anyone. She nodded, said her mother forced her to delete it, said the stewardess who saw it nearly fainted. That same stewardess came back a few minutes later and asked for the phone. The girl had already factory reset it, but she had sent it to one person, me. Later that night, I watched the footage again, paused, rewound, studied it frame by frame. And I saw something I hadn't noticed before. In the reflection of the window beside the figure, something else was watching it. Something standing in the aisle, closer than I'd thought, too close. 2 days later, I received a call from someone at the airline maintenance crew. Not official, not recorded, just a low, tired voice that asked if I had noticed anything strange in row 21. I didn't answer at first. He said they had pulled the seat after passenger reports, said it was standard protocol when a structural anomaly was suspected. He laughed. But it wasn't the kind of laugh that meant anything good. We thought maybe a loose spring, he said, or faulty pressure sensors, something mechanical. It wasn't. They removed the cushion, peeled it open like a wound, and there, deep in the padding where no one would have ever looked unless they were told to, were teeth, human teeth. Not just 1 or 2, a full handful, molars, incisors, tiny ones like from a child. Some cracked down the center, one still threaded with a bit of dark, waxy nerve. No roots, just loose, hidden like coins in a jar. He said the foam around them was stained dark, but not fresh. No smell, not anymore. Just old rot soaked into material. The serial number on the seat didn't match the aircraft manifest. In fact, that specific seat model had been discontinued after a crash in the 1970s. Flight manifest lost. Black box unrecovered. A ghost flight, they called it. No survivors, no cause. Nothing left but wreckage scattered in the Rockies, and one salvaged seat. No one could explain how it got on board. The refurb history of the aircraft showed nothing unusual. No record of that seat being installed. But here's the part that keeps me up, he said, before they carted it off. He reached down just once to feel under the cushion himself. Just to prove it. Just to touch the horror with his own hands. There was something else tucked behind the foam. A name tag. Plastic. Cracked. Letters barely legible. But the last name? It was mine. It wasn't. We were somewhere over the North Atlantic when the call came in. I was half asleep in my jump seat, headset resting around my neck. The first officer nudged me, pale as chalk. "Listen," he whispered. The transmission cut through the silence like a scream, underwater, distorted, jagged. "Mayday. Mayday. This is Flight 920. We've lost both engines. Cabin depressurizing. We need, then static." I sat up fast, fumbling for the log. There was no Flight 920 on the radar. Not in our corridor. Not anywhere near our altitude. "Maybe a military call?" I said, but my voice lacked conviction. The captain hailed back. No response. The transponder code hadn't even pinged. We tried relaying it to air traffic control. The channel crackled once, then silence. Not even a squawk. I kept glancing at the instruments. Nothing looked off. But I couldn't shake it. The voice had sounded close, as if it were in the room with us. I swear I could hear the breath hitch between words. I asked the captain if we should report it as an emergency relay. He hesitated. "I flew this route 15 years ago, he said, voice low. "Heard a call just like that." Same voice. Same flight number. He turned and looked at me dead serious. That plane went down in 1977, somewhere near Greenland, never recovered. I laughed. I didn't mean to, it just slipped out. Nervous, hollow. He didn't laugh back. I checked the frequency logs. The signal hadn't registered, like we'd imagined it. But then, on the overhead panel, one of the indicators blinked. COM TW. An open mic. From where? We cycled through every internal channel. Cabin, galley, lav, flight deck. No one was transmitting, but the light stayed on. Quiet. Constant. Then, just beneath the hum of the system so soft it barely registered, I heard it again. Breathing. Steady. Waiting. We ran a triangulation on the signal, assuming it was a glitch or some kind of reflection. There wasn't supposed to be anything else in our airspace, nothing close enough to bounce back a frequency. But the numbers didn't make sense. Not lateral. Not off course. The signal was coming from directly above us. At first I thought it was just a miscalculation, some fluke in the coordinates. But the more we refined it, the clearer it became. Whatever was transmitting, it was in our vertical air column, less than 500 feet overhead. The captain turned white. His hands froze on the yoke. He tilted the nose ever so slightly and told me to check the TCAS system, the traffic collision avoidance display. Nothing. Just our blip. Alone, as we should be. But the signal kept pulsing. The voice returned again. Clearer this time, almost desperate. "We see you. Please respond. God help us." I looked out the window. Nothing above but black sky and cloud cover. We were flying steady. No turbulence. Nothing to suggest another aircraft was anywhere near us. But the way the signal pressed down, the way it seemed to hum just behind my eyes, it felt close. Like something was hovering right above our roof, attached to us. The flight attendant knocked on the cockpit door then. Said a passenger claimed they saw another plane pass directly over us, upside down, just for a second. Said it had no lights, no markings, no windows, just metal, streaked with ice. And that as it passed, all the in-flight screens flickered, briefly showing static. Every one of them. I opened the cockpit door just a crack and looked back. The aisle lights were dim, passengers still, asleep or pretending. And then one of the ceiling panels creaked, a soft, dragging sound, like something crawling overhead. At 0400 hours, just as we were settling back into our routine, the controller patched in with a strained voice. "We're picking up a secondary transponder signal. Unknown aircraft. Matches flight 920. I felt my stomach drop. I glanced at the captain. He didn't say anything, just reached forward and turned up the gain on the secondary radar feed. And there it was. Altitude match. Heading match. Speed consistent with a standard long haul. It was riding the exact same corridor as us. Just above. Maybe 400 feet. Maybe less. There were no flight plans filed for that airframe. No visual contact. But the signal, whatever it was real. Registered on 2 separate tracking systems. Even the military feed confirmed it. Then something even worse. The old code pinged. Squawk 7700. Emergency. Total systems failure. The same code broadcast the night it crashed in 1977. I reached for the intercom, tried to loop in the rear of the cabin, but the system cut out. Static roared through the speakers, low and broken. Not loud, but constant, like it was leaking through. We watched the radar. 2 dots, ours and theirs. For 3 full minutes, it followed us. Exactly. Then, without any altitude shift, without any turn or deviation, the signal flickered once and vanished. Gone. No transponder. No return ping. Just our plane again, alone in the corridor. The controller came back on. We lost it. It just disappeared. I started shaking. I don't know why. I've flown for years. I've been through storms, near misses, blown tires, full system shutdowns. But this was different. This wasn't mechanical. This wasn't human error. The captain leaned over slowly and whispered, "Back then, before they lost contact, they said they saw something in the clouds, following them." I asked him what it looked like. He didn't answer. He just reached up and closed the cockpit window shade. The static didn't stop. Not after the signal vanished. Not after the dot disappeared from radar. It kept pressing through the headset like a heartbeat. Low. Uneven. Whispering behind the noise. Almost like it wanted us to lean in, to strain for it. Then it cleared for exactly 4 seconds. The voice that came through wasn't one I recognized, not the captain from earlier, not the woman from the original distress call. This one was broken. Male. Charred at the edges, like the throat it came from was barely holding together. "We are still burning." Just that. 4 words. And then the static returned, louder than before, screeching like metal ripping itself apart inside a tunnel. The cabin lights flickered. Not just a momentary surge, this was patterned, deliberate. One side of the plane, then the other. A pulse. A warning. I grabbed the captain's arm. "Are we getting interference from lightning?" I asked. He didn't answer, because through the cockpit window, fire was reflecting in the clouds. No lightning, no storm, just a flickering orange glow far above, moving in the same direction we were. It shouldn't have been possible. There was nothing else in the air with us, nothing scheduled, nothing logged. But the glow stayed, bright, burning. And with every second it followed, the temperature in the cockpit rose, slightly, just enough to notice. A trickle of sweat down the back of my neck, a metallic scent rising from the vents. Then a chime. One of the passengers had pressed the call button. I switched over and answered it. The voice on the other end was trembling. "Something's wrong with the window." I asked which row. She said, "It's not showing the sky anymore. It's showing people." I asked her to clarify. She whispered, "They're all on fire." The line went dead, and then we smelled it: charred hair, smoldering fabric. The cockpit thermometer ticked up 1 more degree. Just 1. But I swear I heard the hiss of flesh. The moment we touched down in Montreal, ground control requested we remain on board. The crew didn't ask why. None of us did. We sat there in the dark, the cabin still stinking faintly of ash, the air thick with silence. They boarded us. Quiet men in dark uniforms, no airline logos. One carried a laptop, another a flight recorder scanner. They didn't speak, just took the data from the cockpit and left. 3 hours later, we were allowed to deplane. We were told nothing. No report filed. Not officially, but I couldn't let it go. A week later, I ran the call sign we picked up. November Echo 701. It was a dead entry. Flight logs said it belonged to a chartered Lockheed aircraft en route from Buenos Aires to Toronto in November of 1972. It disappeared somewhere over the Atlantic. Final message: fire in the cabin, Mayday. Then silence. They never found the wreckage. Not a wing, not a seat cushion. Every one of the 73 people on board was declared dead. But here's the thing: radar contact was lost at the exact coordinates we'd picked up that signal. The voice that whispered, "We are still burning." I looked deeper. I dug through records I wasn't supposed to access. One maintenance report from 1972 said a passenger had been caught smoking in the lavatory. Said a trash bin had caught fire. It was out in minutes. But that was the last log before takeoff. No one ever confirmed if it was fully extinguished. And the woman's voice? The one from the first transmission? A survivor from a separate flight, Flight 114 from 1970, claimed to hear that same voice in her dreams for decades, until the night she slit her own throat, mumbling about burning corridors in the sky. They called it survivor's guilt, but I don't think we were intercepting a ghost transmission. I think the plane never stopped flying. I think somewhere above the clouds. Flight November, Echo 701 is still looping the same doomed route. Passengers half burned, trapped in their final screams. I think we heard them, and I think they heard us back. I was lucky to get on at all. Storm delays had backed up every flight out of Chicago, and I'd been on standby since sunrise. When the gate agent finally called my name, she didn't smile, just handed me the ticket like it weighed too much. Seat 22C. Middle, last row. The plane was already boarding when I stepped on the air, thick with recycled cold and that strange, metallic dryness only airplanes seem to have. Most passengers had already buckled in, eyes down, headphones in, except for her. She sat in 22B, right next to my seat. Pale skin, thin hair, clothes out of season like she was dressed for winter in the 1950s. A long gray coat, buttoned all the way to her throat. Hands in her lap, not fidgeting, not scrolling a phone, just still. When I sat down, I noticed it immediately. She was ice cold. Not figuratively. I mean actually cold. The kind of cold that seeps into your skin if you're too close. The armrest between us was freezing. I shifted in my seat and tried not to look at her. She never looked at me. Even when I greeted her, just a quiet, "Hi," she didn't move. The flight took off on time. Everything about it felt uneventful, routine, except that cold never went away. Not like regular air conditioning, not like a vent was aimed wrong. It was her, a little pocket of winter pressed against my side. I asked the man in the window seat if he felt it. He said, "What cold?" And then he gave me a look, like he didn't understand the question. I turned back to her. Her eyes were shut now, but she wasn't sleeping. She hadn't blinked once since I'd sat down. And now, in the dim cabin light, I noticed something I should have seen sooner. She wasn't breathing, not even a little. No rise in her chest, no fog against her collar. But she hadn't been there when I boarded. I would have seen her. I swear I would have seen her. Because I took the last seat. The agent said so herself. Somewhere over the Rockies, I must have dozed off. Just a light sleep. The kind you fall into when the hum of the engines drowns everything else out. I didn't dream, or if I did, I don't remember. But I do remember waking up. My head was leaning to the side, resting against something that felt colder than metal. It was her. I'd shifted in my sleep and brushed her shoulder. Only now, she wasn't still. She was facing me. Not turned facing. Her entire upper body twisted at an impossible angle. Like the rest of her hadn't moved, but her head had rotated to meet mine. Her face was inches from mine, so close I could see every crack in her dry lips, every gray strand of hair that had fallen forward over her cheek. And her eyes were wide open, cloudy, milky white, like they'd been soaking in water for too long, pupils swallowed by something thick and unnatural, not blind, empty. She wasn't blinking, not breathing, just watching. I didn't move right away. I couldn't. My limbs were heavy, not with sleep, with dread, that kind that settles into your spine and whispers, "Don't react. Don't run. It's already seen you." The overhead lights flickered once, twice. I whispered, "Ma'am." No answer. She didn't flinch, didn't twitch, didn't even acknowledge the word, just stared. And then, slowly, her mouth opened. Not wide, just enough for a sound to escape. A whisper, like wind moving through broken glass. But the words didn't make sense. They weren't English. They weren't language at all. Just a guttural, rhythmic chant that didn't belong on this plane or anywhere else. I pressed the call button. Fast. The man in the window seat stirred but didn't wake. A flight attendant approached. I turned to her, desperate to explain what was happening. But when I looked back at the woman, her head was resting straight again. Eyes closed, hands folded in her lap, and the cold? Gone. The attendant gave me a strained smile. "Sir, everything okay?" I didn't answer, because now I wasn't sure if I'd ever really fallen asleep. I waited until the next crew passed to say something. My voice was steady, but my skin felt too tight, like every nerve was trying to crawl out. "I think the woman next to me is sick," I told the flight attendant. She was unresponsive and cold. The attendant's polite smile flickered. "What woman?" "The one in the middle seat," I said. "She's been here since we took off. Pale, older, dark sweater. She was whispering something." He glanced past me, looked directly at the seat, then back at me. "There's no one in that seat, sir." I turned. She was there, sitting perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, eyes shut like nothing had ever happened, like she hadn't been inches from my face, murmuring in tongues. "You're telling me you don't see her?" I asked. The attendant straightened, his face smoothing into something blank. Practiced, too neutral. "Sir, that seat was unassigned when we left the gate. You're in 21A. The aisle seat is occupied, the middle is not. But," he leaned closer, lowered his voice, "please don't cause a disturbance. Let us know if you feel unwell." And then he walked away. The man on the other side of her never looked up, just kept his headphones in, pretending to watch the seatback screen. Or maybe pretending not to hear anything. I turned back to her. Her lips were parted now, just slightly. A faint hum leaked out of her mouth. Not music, not speech, just sound, like the cabin itself had found a voice. I opened my tray table just to keep my hands busy. There was something etched into the plastic. Faint, deep, letters scraped by something sharp. "She was never meant to..." Hervé snapped it shut. I don't remember the rest of the meal service, or the safety check, or the captain's update. Time started to slip, blur. But every time I looked, she was still there. Every time I blinked, I feared she'd turn to face me again. The woman in the seat no one would admit existed. The jet bridge groaned as we docked. I didn't move, neither did she. I waited for the seatbelt sign to go off, waited for the shuffle of passengers grabbing bags and jackets. The man on the aisle stood, stretched, grabbed his things. He gave me a half smile as he stepped past. She didn't move. I leaned over, cautious, not sure what I expected. Her eyes were closed again, her hands still folded, but there was something off about the skin now. Waxy, too smooth, like a mannequin left too long in the sun. I stood quickly, heart pounding. I turned to the aisle, caught the eye of a different flight attendant and said, "I think someone needs to check on her. She hasn't moved since takeoff." The attendant's brows pulled together. She looked into the seat, then up at me. "That row's been empty, sir." No. I was sitting next to her. Middle seat. Older woman, dark hair, gray cardigan. The attendant frowned and pulled out her manifest, flipped pages, ran a finger down a list. "There are no passengers assigned to 21B. You were seated next to an unoccupied seat, and the man in 21C." Her voice tightened. "Sir, were you feeling dizzy during the flight? Experiencing nausea?" I ignored her and turned back to the seat. Empty. No trace. No indentation in the cushion. No scarf. No bag. Not even a crease in the safety card. I pushed past the line and marched out into the terminal. Found a gate agent at the desk. Demanded a full passenger manifest. She looked confused. "I'm sorry. That information isn't public." I gave her the name I'd seen on the luggage tag the woman had held in her lap. Said I was a relative. She humored me. Typed it in. Paused. "No one with that name was on board," she said. I asked if she could check the previous leg. The return trip. The week before. She blinked at her screen, and her face went pale. "There was a woman with that name," she said quietly, "but she wasn't on your flight." I leaned in. "She died mid-air. They say he never left the terminal. Security footage shows him pacing the concourse for hours, sitting, standing, talking to no one. At one point, he's caught on camera speaking quietly to an empty seat in the food court. His eyes locked on something just past the lens. That was 2 days after landing. By day 3, he had stopped responding to staff. He wasn't aggressive, just smiling, vacant, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Maintenance found him in one of the far bathrooms, the kind that gets used when the others are full. He had wedged himself between the stall and the wall, knees pulled tight to his chest, frozen, stiff, lips cracked, pale as frostbite. The water had been running, no damage to the body, no signs of trauma, no drugs, no alcohol, just a man who had flown standby, found a seat that should not have existed, and never truly disembarked. He had something clutched in his fist. The police had to pry it out. It was a boarding pass, printed, torn at the edge, no barcode, no date, no airline logo, just one line typed in faint ink, the letters barely readable, Sayat taken. His expression never changed. Not during autopsy. Not even when his family flew in to identify the body. Lips curled upward, teeth showing, a grin stretched too wide, and his eyes open, staring past the coroner's light at something just over her shoulder. Something she said she felt, not saw. Cold air, a whisper, a voice. She wouldn't repeat what it said. Not exactly. Just that it was a woman's voice. Soft, close, and very, very pleased. We were supposed to land in Portland just after midnight. Clear skies, no delays. But 2 hours later, we were still in the air, circling. The captain announced a holding pattern, something about congestion. But when I looked out the window, I saw nothing. No lights below. No city. Just black. The couple across the aisle had started whispering. The woman kept checking her phone, frustrated. "No signal," she murmured. I checked mine. Same. No bars. No service. Not even a clock. Just the spinning wheel, like the device itself didn't know where we were. Someone asked the flight attendant how much longer. She smiled, too wide, and said, "We'll land when it's time." Then she walked away, not down the aisle, but through the curtain at the front, and never came back. An elderly man in the row behind me leaned forward and whispered, "They're not telling us the truth." His eyes were wet, wide. This happened once before, 1987, flight out of Chicago, never landed. They just kept circling, for days. I laughed, but it came out wrong, hollow. I looked at the flight map on the seat screen. It showed us floating, no path, no destination, just the outline of the aircraft surrounded by a slow, rotating circle. The engines sounded wrong, too soft, like we weren't cutting through anything at all, like the air around us had thickened, or maybe vanished. When I pressed my face to the window, I realized something that made my chest tighten. There were no stars, no horizon, not even the curvature of the earth. Just dark, absolute, endless dark. Someone screamed. A child, maybe. Then it stopped. Silence again. That's when the captain's voice came back. But it wasn't the same voice. Too slow, too calm. We thank you for your patience. We are still in our holding pattern. Estimated landing time, unknown. You may begin to forget. The captain's voice came through again, but it was tighter this time, strained. We're burning fuel faster than expected. Just a little longer, folks. That was the last time he tried to sound calm. Minutes later, I heard it clicks from the overhead speakers. Not a real transmission, just open air. And then the captain again, but not addressing us. Mayday, Mayday. This is Flight Sierra 19er requesting immediate landing clearance at Portland International. We are low on fuel. Repeat, low on fuel. The reply came through in pieces. Negative. Sierra 19er, no record. That airport does not exist. Passengers had stopped pretending everything was fine. People were pacing the aisles. One woman kept staring at the emergency exit like she thought it might open to something better. A man was praying. Loud. Over and over. The window beside me showed nothing. Not even clouds anymore. Just a soft swirl of gray on gray. It felt like the plane wasn't moving at all, just hovering in place. One of the flight attendants, the same one who had disappeared behind the curtain earlier, stumbled back into the cabin. Her uniform was soaked with sweat, her name tag missing. She didn't say anything, just stood near the galley, mouth trembling, eyes on something none of us could see. The captain screamed then through the intercom, unfiltered panic. They said it's not real. They said the airport isn't real. I can see the lights. I can see the runway. What the hell is going on? Why won't they let us land? Silence. Then the static returned, and beneath it, something else. Breathing. Not human. Slow and damp, like the lungs on the tape from a dive wreck. A soft ding rang out overhead. The seatbelt sign flickered. Then a new voice came over the speakers. Not the captain, not the co-pilot. Return to your seats, it said. There is no landing. There is no airport. There never was. The screen in front of me went black. One word burned in red for just a moment before vanishing. Lost. The descent began without warning. No announcement. No landing checklist. Just the subtle drop in pressure and that familiar tilt of the wings. I looked out the window and expected city lights. Familiar ones. Portland, maybe. Seattle. But the skyline beneath us wasn't anything I recognized. Buildings stretched upward at wrong angles, like someone had remembered skyscrapers but built them from memory alone. Spires, sharp and asymmetrical, pierced through a low mist that didn't move. Lights blinked in no pattern, blue, red, green, but none of them steady. The ground wasn't black, or brown, or city gray. It shimmered. Like oil on water, or skin. Someone a few rows back began to cry quietly. "We're going in too fast," a man muttered from across the aisle. He had his tray table up, his hands white-knuckling the armrests. Too fast. We're not lined up. He wasn't wrong. The buildings weren't getting closer in the way they should. They twisted as we passed them. Not physically, but in perspective. Like they weren't below us at all, but beside us. Watching. The captain's voice crackled back on. But it was clipped. Not like him. Altitude locked, vectors stable, awaiting descent clearance. From who? ATC had gone silent. The flight attendant was back. Just one this time. Her lips were blue. Her hands shook as she moved down the aisle. checking nothing, speaking to no one. When she passed my row, I saw blood beneath her fingernails. Outside, the ground drew closer, but it wasn't flat. Roads curved like veins across the landscape, and cars moved, but not like cars, more like insects, scuttling too fast, blinking in and out of sight. Someone up front shouted, "That's not a city," and I felt it, a change. Like the plane bucked against something we couldn't see, like it didn't want to go any lower. Then, a soft bump, not a landing, a jolt, like we hit air that was too thick. And the intercom whispered, "Do not recognize this place." That's when the lights in the cabin went out. Every screen, every bulb, gone. Just the sound of our breathing. And beneath that, something else. Scratching. From inside the walls. The lights flickered once, then steadied. The screens in front of us stayed black. No flight map, no speed, no altitude, just empty monitors and the faint hum of systems trying to pretend nothing was wrong. Then the intercom clicked on again, but it wasn't the captain. The voice was softer, older, familiar, somehow. And it said only 2 words, "Welcome back." No one spoke. No one moved. The words didn't make sense. We hadn't landed. We hadn't even been here before. Wherever here was, the descent resumed, this time steeper. I could feel it in my chest. That weightless drop, like missing a step in the dark. The air thinned, but the cabin pressure stayed the same. Wrong. Everything about it felt wrong. The skyline outside had changed again. The buildings were gone. Now it looked like forest, but not one I'd ever seen. Trees that pulsed faintly, glowing red beneath bark that looked almost wet. Shapes moved between them too fast to track, and too tall. Slender things, walking in pairs, always watching. A low moan rolled through the cabin. Not from the engines, from the plane itself. Metal stressed in a way I'd never heard before. Like it was being bent from the outside, like something wanted in. The woman in the row ahead of me stood up suddenly, her head jerking to the side as if listening to something. Her voice was calm, distant. "He told me I'd come back different," she whispered. Then she sat again, perfectly still. The flight attendant returned, walking slowly down the aisle. Her eyes were rolled back completely, only whites visible. Her smile was too wide. Her mouth didn't move, but a voice came out of it anyway. "You never should have circled." A child cried out somewhere behind me. Not in fear, in recognition. As we descended further, the window frost began to spread not from cold, but from inside the glass. It curled like fingers, like veins. The man beside me grabbed my hand. "It's not letting us land," he said. "It's letting us back." The wheels touched something solid, but no one cheered, because whatever we landed on, it was breathing. They said, Flight 914 landed safely, that all systems were nominal, that it taxied to the gate on time, just like it always had. But no one got off the plane. The jet bridge locked. The doors stayed sealed. Ground crew reported no movement inside, no visible passengers. When they finally forced the hatch, the cabin was empty. Still warm. Coffee cups on tray tables. Magazines folded open mid-article. A hearing aid buzzing faintly under a seat. Every suitcase was accounted for. Every seatbelt unbuckled. But no people. At first, they assumed a hijacking, then a systems error. But the black box had been wiped, completely clean, as if the flight had never existed, only it had. Family members were called, investigators interviewed, press blackouts ordered, but the families refused to stay quiet. Not when their phones started ringing, always at the same time, 3:13 a.m. every night. Caller ID showed the names of their missing loved ones. Some even answered. But all they heard was static. And then a voice. A whisper. Familiar and wrong. One mother said her daughter's voice came through, laughing softly. "We're circling again, Mommy. It's almost time." A husband reported hearing an engine in the background and crying. Then silence. Then a second voice, not his wife's, but something using her tone. "You shouldn't have listened when they said to let go." No signal traced, no GPS match. The FAA closed the investigation after 4 weeks. But the calls kept coming. Some phones were powered off. Others had been disconnected entirely. One was sealed in an evidence locker in Quantico. Still, they rang. 313, every night. And now, the families have started disappearing too. A brother gone from a locked apartment. A mother vanishing from a hospital bed, always at night, always alone. There's a theory among a few rogue investigators that whatever Flight 914 flew into didn't just take the plane. It needed witnesses, threads to pull, doors left cracked open, and somewhere circling just out of radar range, there's still a cabin full of empty seats waiting to be filled again. The worst part? Some of the calls don't come from cell phones anymore. They come from the cockpit. The masks dropped with a hiss like 1,000 snakes. People jolted awake. Some screamed. Most fumbled them on without question. But no one passed out. No one gasped for breath. That was the first sign something wasn't right. I didn't feel lighter. I felt heavier, like the gravity had thickened somehow, pressing down on my chest and shoulders. Every breath through the mask came slower than it should have. Wet, dense, like trying to breathe through syrup. The lights flickered, not like a power surge, but like something brushing past the bulbs, dimming them in intervals. The pilot's voice came on the intercom. Calm. Too calm. Please remain seated. This is not an emergency. The masks are simply a precaution. But it was the wrong voice. We had spoken with the captain at the gate. A woman, middle-aged, firm handshake. The voice now speaking was a man's, and I swear I'd heard it before somewhere far older than any cockpit. A low hum started to build, just beneath the hearing threshold. My seat vibrated with it. The air grew thick with the scent of something sweet, almost metallic. A woman 2 rows up vomited into her lap. The man beside her clutched his mask like it was choking him. People started whispering, not to each other, to their masks, like they were hearing something through them. I pulled mine off, and the weight lifted. Instantly, I could breathe, but no one else seemed to notice. A child across the aisle looked at me, eyes wide and bleeding from the tear ducts. She didn't speak, just lifted her mask slightly and mouthed something. "He's coming through!" The humming was louder now, pulsing like a heartbeat. I turned to look down the aisle, toward the cockpit door. It was opening. Only there was no one standing there. Just something folding through the air. A ripple, like heat distortion, only darker, more aware. And behind it, the smell of old, wet earth. I put the mask back on, not to breathe, but to hide, because whatever was leaking through that door wasn't looking for oxygen. It was looking for something alive. At first, I thought they were just exhausted. Long flight, delays, turbulence. One by one, passengers slumped in their seats, heads tilting at strange angles, mouths slightly open. But it wasn't sleep. Not really. Their eyes were still open, and they were twitching. Small jerks of the fingers. A toe. A cheek muscle, fluttering like a trapped moth. Some were mouthing words slowly, over and over, but they weren't English, not even close. The syllables scratched at the base of my skull, like something I should remember from a nightmare I was forced to forget. A man in the row ahead of me arched backward so suddenly his head hit the seat behind him. I saw his hands curl into claws, then fall limp. His eyes stared glassy at the overhead light, unblinking. The hum hadn't stopped. It had deepened. Now it sounded like it was inside the cabin, like the plane itself was groaning under pressure, but not from outside, from within. I reached for the call button. The light didn't come on. No response. The aisles were empty, no sign of the flight attendants. Not even the sound of movement behind the curtain near the galley. I stood, slowly, trying not to disturb anyone. That's when I saw her. A little girl in the aisle near the emergency exit. No parents, no seat. Just standing there, barefoot, arms at her sides, watching everyone as they slept. Her eyes were the same as theirs, wide, fixed. But she wasn't twitching. She was smiling. When I met her gaze, my ears popped. Hard, like we'd changed altitude. But the cabin pressure hadn't shifted. I didn't need it. She tilted her head. Then she whispered, "Almost done now." And all around me, the passengers sighed at once. Long, unified, like they were releasing something, or letting something in. One woman slumped forward and began to hum, the exact same tone the plane had been vibrating with since the masks dropped. Her voice merged with the sound perfectly, like she'd been tuned to it. I didn't sit back down. I started walking toward the cockpit, because if I didn't get out of there soon, I had the awful feeling I'd fall asleep next. With my eyes wide open, I reached the cockpit door and knocked. No answer. I tried the intercom. Static. The handle wouldn't turn. Locked. Sealed tight from the inside. But when I pressed my ear to the door, I didn't hear voices. No chatter. No instruments clicking or radio hissing. Just a slow, hollow thudding, like something heavy being dragged in a circle. I called out. My voice sounded strange in the still air, muffled, swallowed by the pressure. No reply. I turned, looking down the aisle. More passengers had fallen asleep since I'd stood, their faces slack, pale. No sound came out, but I could see the rhythm of it, like they were rehearsing something, or praying. The girl was gone. I banged on the cockpit door again, harder this time. Something behind it shifted. Not a person, not footsteps. It was slower than that, like fabric dragging against metal or fingers. The thudding stopped. I backed away. The humming returned stronger now. It vibrated through the soles of my shoes, rattled in my teeth. I looked up at the speaker above the galley. It was on, but no one had touched it. The girl's voice came through again, soft and cold. You weren't supposed to be awake. My vision dimmed at the edges, not from panic, from pressure. Like something was pushing against the inside of my skull. My nose started to bleed, thin at first, then steady. One of the asleep passengers twitched violently and slumped into the aisle. He stared up at me, eyes wide. I thought he was dead until he whispered something. I leaned in. He said, he opened the wrong door. Behind me, the cockpit handle clicked, but I hadn't touched it. And from the other side came a noise I still can't explain. Not breathing, not movement, not human. It was like the sky itself was pushing its way in. The captain sat frozen in his seat, hands hovering inches above the controls. His breathing was shallow, fogging the inside of his oxygen mask in soft bursts. The autopilot was engaged, altitude steady, no alarms, no warnings. But he wasn't looking at the instruments anymore. He was staring at the center display, the feed from the cabin camera. At first, nothing. Rows of passengers, limp and silent. heads tilted at strange angles, not sleeping, not conscious, just waiting. Then, movement. It slid into frame from above, wrong, jerky motion, like old film skipping frames, something pale and jointed, too long in the arms, too short in the torso, crawling along the ceiling like it didn't understand gravity. It paused, its head turned toward the camera sideways, insect-like. It had no eyes, just a smooth gray stretch of skin that pulsed when it tilted forward, as though sniffing. The captain reached for the intercom, stopped. The thing opened its mouth. No sound came through the feed, but the captain flinched. He adjusted the volume, leaned closer. It was speaking, soundless, fast. Then he heard it not through the monitor, but inside the cockpit, the same voice he'd heard as a child, lost in the woods for hours. The same voice his mother had sworn was a nightmare. Soft, sweet. Breathe in, let go. The camera feed glitched. Static crawled across the screen like frost. When it cleared, the thing was gone. Passengers still limp. But one seat 13F was now empty. The captain checked the manifest. That seat had been unassigned. He panned the camera. There it was again, at the rear of the cabin now, hunched low beside the lavatory door, one hand braced against the ceiling, head tilted at a broken angle. Its mouth was still moving. But now, so were the passengers. Each of them, one by one, began whispering, not words, just breath, like a wind rising from inside their chests. The cabin pressure warning light blinked again. The captain turned back toward the door behind him. Slowly, dreading what he already knew, the handle was turning. From the inside, the plane touched down without a bump. Smooth, too smooth. The kind of landing pilots brag about in break rooms, except there was no pilot at the controls. The tower tried hailing the crew. No reply. Just a low, steady static that didn't match any known frequency. By the time ground teams reached the jet bridge, the aircraft was powered down, systems offline, lights dimmed, but the cabin was full. Every passenger still strapped in. Upright, calm, smiling. Their eyes were glassy, not blinking, not moving, but their chests rose and fell in perfect unison like a choir breathing before the first note. The sound wasn't quite snoring. It wasn't restful. It was mechanical, forced, as if lungs were just machines now, being run by something else. The air smelled faintly of ozone and copper. When responders boarded, the oxygen masks were still dangling, untouched. Some passengers had blood on their ears, their lips, the corners of their eyes, but none of them had noticed. They just stared forward, breathing, smiling. Then the cockpit door opened on its own. The captain's seat was empty. The co-pilot's too. Flight logs had been wiped. No flight plan. No black box transmission. Nothing. Only one thing was left behind. In the captain's seat, where a human would sit, there was a smear, like condensation left by something that wasn't fully solid, something that didn't belong in air, let alone in this world. A forensic tech tried to speak to one of the passengers, touched her shoulder. She turned slowly, still smiling, and in a voice that did not belong to her, she said, "You breathe what we breathe now." Then, together, all the passengers exhaled, a single long breath that filled the cabin like a wind rising from the bottom of the sea. The lights blew out. The recording ends there, but if you stand near that plane now, what's left of it, you can still hear it. That breath, that perfect rhythm, as if something is still inside, waiting for the next flight. The flight was uneventful. One of those easy overnights where the cabin lights stay dim and everyone wants to sleep. Just how she liked it. She didn't notice the journal until descent. Wedged deep behind the cushion of the forward jump seat. No name on the cover. Just a worn, brown leather wrap and a thin elastic strap stretched so tightly it looked fused to the cover. She turned her back to the aisle, unlooped it. First page. If you're reading this, you've worked Flight Delta 199, and you've seen her. She paused, looked out over the dozing passengers, then flipped the page. She stands in the forward galley, near the coffee station. Pale, no shoes, always smiling. She doesn't blink. Don't offer her anything. Don't speak. And never, ever turn your back. She felt cold then, the kind of chill that crawls up from your ribs and behind your ears. The forward galley was just steps away. She kept reading. The handwriting changed, different pens, different hands, like a dozen other attendants had written in it over time, maybe more. One entry read, "She disappears before landing. Every time. I check the lavs. I check the cockpit. She's never on the manifest. But there's always one cup missing. Another. I made the mistake of asking if she needed help." She smiled wider. Her teeth weren't right. Too many, some going sideways. She closed the journal, tucked it into her apron pocket, and turned toward the galley. No one there. But the coffee pot was warm, still full, and a single plastic cup sat beside it, empty. Steam curled from its rim. She didn't remember pouring it, didn't remember anyone asking. Then something caught her eye. A faint imprint. Bare footprints on the steel floor, leading toward the cockpit. She reached for the intercom, but her fingers wouldn't move. Her hand stayed clenched, pressed against her thigh. Her body had locked up, every muscle rigid, like something inside her had shut the controls off. The jump seat behind her creaked, and from the galley, soft close, came a voice. "Coffee's cold." The plane jolted. Not turbulence. Descent had begun, but they were not descending alone. She didn't sleep that night. After the passengers disembarked and the cabin was cleared, she took the journal to the crew lounge and flipped through it again, this time slower. She hadn't imagined it. The entries were real. But now that she was looking closer, something else stood out. The dates. June 6th, 1961. December 12th, 1978. August 2nd, 1995. April 3rd, 2009. Dozens of them, scattered across decades. But every entry written in the same narrow, looping script. The same style of pen. No change in pressure or slant, like the same hand had written them all. But that was impossible. She double-checked. The ink never faded. The words never scratched or shook. Even the pressure on the page consistent, as if time hadn't touched it at all. The next entry. She's stronger now. I don't think the jump seat holds her anymore. I saw her in the aisle. Row 10. She was mouthing something to the man by the window. He didn't notice. I don't think he could. But I could. She glanced around the crew room. Empty. Quiet. Another entry. I burned the last copy, left it in the lav trash. Next day, it was back in the jump seat. Open to a new page. The words were already written. Her fingers trembled. She tried to find a signature, a name, anything. Nothing, except one short note tucked into the very last page. This flight is hers now. She doesn't need tickets. She doesn't age. She only smiles when someone new sees her. You did, didn't you? The journal snapped shut in her hands. She hadn't touched it, hadn't even moved. Her phone buzzed in her jacket. A new voicemail. No number. No ID. She played it on speaker. Static. At first, then a click. Then a voice, barely above a whisper. Row 10. Aisle seat. He can see her now, too. She dropped the phone. It didn't hit the floor. She looked down. Nothing was there. Just dark. Like the floor had vanished. She wasn't in the crew room anymore. She was in the cabin, and every jump seat was full. She stayed grounded the next day, called out sick, said she had a migraine. Truth was, she couldn't get the journal out of her hands. It felt wrong to let it go, like it would disappear the moment she looked away. She laid it open across her lap, pen hovering just above the page. She wasn't writing in it yet, just reading. The most recent entry was dated 2 days from now. It described turbulence, not just bumps, severe drop, altitude loss, drinks in the air, screaming. She checked her schedule. She was on that flight. Then another entry, just a page later, written in the same hand. Passenger in 14C, missing after landing, no sign of forced entry. Window was open. She checked the manifest. Someone was booked in that seat. A man, late 30s, traveling alone. Her stomach churned. She flipped backward, randomly, and landed on a page from 2003, a flight to Tokyo. The handwriting calmly explained the disappearance of 2 flight attendants mid-service. They were walking the aisle. Then they weren't. The next page? A note from 1986. Cabin pressure failure. Only on the left side. It folded inward, like the plane was breathing. Then, one of the passengers smiled through it. She never put her mask on, never blinked. Her hands shook as she turned the pages faster now, needing to find the entry that matched her own shift last week. She found it. There it was, her flight, her route, her name scribbled in the margin. And beneath it, the new girl found the journal. She's reading it now. She thinks she has time. She snapped. The journal closed. Voices echoed outside her apartment. A knock on the door, light but slow. One beat too long between each knock. She didn't move. The journal warmed in her lap, buzzing. She opened it, despite herself. The next entry had appeared. No pen, no movement, just words she hadn't seen before. She didn't listen. She opened the door. She let her in. Then, softly, from just behind the door, a knock, a whisper. "Are you ready for your next flight?" She didn't sleep that night. The journal stayed on the kitchen table, untouched, but never far. Every few hours, she checked it again, hoping the words had changed, that the final entry had finished itself, that the sentence had found an ending. It hadn't. The page was dated tomorrow, her next shift. A red-eye to Seattle. The handwriting was just as precise, neat, deliberate, but it stopped halfway across the line, mid-thought. Do not let her speak to the man in. That was it. No seat number, no name, just that sharp dash and blank space, as if something had interrupted the writer mid-stroke, as if whatever was supposed to come next never had the chance to be written, or worse, wasn't allowed to be. She brought it to the gate with her anyway, tucked it in her bag like a talisman, just in case. She told herself she wouldn't read it again, that she just needed to get through one more flight, land, go home, throw the thing in a river. The flight boarded normally. Nothing strange, nothing wrong. Passengers smiling, kids whining, overhead bins clicking shut. Routine. She kept looking at seat assignments, waiting for a jolt of recognition, for the words from the journal to make sense. But no one stood out. Until halfway through service, when a man from row 21 waved her down. Middle-aged, polite, calm. "Could I bother you for some water?" His voice was soft, kind, even. But the moment she looked into his eyes, her vision blurred. A sharp ringing filled her ears, like pressure equalizing all at once. Her chest tightened. She nodded, turned back toward the galley, then stopped. She didn't remember turning around again, or handing him the water. But when she returned to her jump seat, the journal was open on her tray, and the sentence had continued. Same handwriting, same pen. But not her writing. Do not let her speak to the man in 21B. She already has. She blinked. Below it, one last line, freshly inked. She gives him the journal now. Behind her, the man's voice closer this time. Thank you. I was wondering when you'd bring it back. The impact site was unremarkable. A scar of scorched earth in the Cascades, trees sheared off at the trunk, branches fused with twisted metal. It took search crews 3 days to reach it. By then, there was no fire, just ash, just quiet. All 79 passengers were accounted for, every seat identified, every personal effect cataloged. Wedding rings, cell phones, shoes flung 30 feet from where their owners had Saturday. The black box survived, barely. Static, garbled voices, and one word whispered over and over before the final drop in altitude. Return. They never found the journal. Investigators combed the wreckage twice. Then a third time. No leather-bound notebook, no paper fragments, nothing in the crew's storage areas, nothing matching any known manifest. But the captain's report, filed 3 days before the crash, mentioned it, briefly, a line scribbled in the margins of a checklist. Jump seat pocket contains item not logged, asked Kayla. Kayla Langley, flight attendant. 27. No remains recovered. Her mother swore she'd spoken to her the night before the flight. Kayla had seemed distant, said she was thinking about leaving the job, said she was tired of being watched. That was the word she used. Watched. The strangest detail came from a passenger on the standby list who'd missed the flight by 2 minutes. His story never made it into the press. He said he'd seen something in the gate window as the plane taxied out. A reflection, Kayla's reflection, but the plane was already moving. She wasn't looking out from the cabin. She was staring into it. Weeks later, a new flight crew on a different aircraft reported finding something during final cabin sweep. A journal. Worn. Cracked. Leather. No title. No name. Inside, dozens of entries in the same hand. Different dates, different airlines, all ending abruptly. The airline never confirmed it. The journal disappeared before the NTSB arrived, but someone, somewhere, keeps writing in it. The final page had only one sentence. It was dated the day of the next flight. We go down tonight. He woke up with a jolt, the hum of engines vibrating through his spine. Overhead lights flickered in soft amber, casting long shadows over unmoving forms. Every passenger around him was slumped, heads tilted, mouths parted, some still gripping cups or phones in their hands. He didn't remember the boarding gate, didn't remember checking in, didn't remember where he was going. He blinked hard. The window to his left showed nothing but black, not night sky, not stars, just black, like paint or a curtain. He tried to speak, but the air felt thick in his throat, not choking, just wrong, like breathing underwater. His voice came out hoarse. Hello? No one stirred. He stood. The cabin stretched on forever, or at least it felt that way. He could see past rows and rows of still bodies. Every seat filled, no movement at all. He touched the shoulder of the woman in front of him. Cold, damp. His skin recoiled. He stumbled toward the front, gripping seat backs, whispering louder now. Is anyone awake? Please, hello? He passed a toddler, mouth open in a soundless wail. An elderly man, smiling with his eyes wide open. A flight attendant, eyes rolled back, her hand still hovering near the call button. None of them blinked. He reached the galley. The cart was missing. The cabin door sealed. Then came the voice, over the intercom. Not a captain, not a crew member, a child. Go back to your seat. He froze. The voice came again, more distant this time, echoing, like it wasn't coming from the speakers at all. Go back to your seat. The descent has already begun. The plane shook, slightly. Then again. The lights dimmed. He reached the cockpit. The door was ajar. Inside, no pilots, just static on the radio. Gauges spinning, altitude dropping, and in the co-pilot's chair a boarding pass. His name was on it, and under destination, one word, below. Behind him, every seatbelt clicked shut in unison. He backed out of the cockpit, the static still crackling behind him. Every seatbelt remained fastened. Every passenger, motionless. He made it halfway down the aisle before stopping his seat. The tray table was down. The seatback screen lit. It had been off before. Now it flickered softly, displaying a familiar image. Not a movie, not a map. His childhood home. Not just the house, the exact house. Yellow siding, cracked step, a rusted bike leaning beside the porch. The maple tree with the broken swing he fell from when he was 7. Every detail right, down to the missing curtain in the left attic window. He reached for the screen. The image shifted. The angle zoomed inward, like a slow glide toward the front door. The doorknob turned without sound, and the door creaked open. Inside, dim light, dust, stillness, then movement. Something small peeked around the corner from the hallway. He squinted. It was him, younger, maybe 8, eyes hollow, not blinking. The boy walked toward the camera, toward him, until his pale face filled the screen. He stared with that same vacant look, head tilting just slightly to the side. Then the voice again, from somewhere above. You never came back. The screen went black. He shot up, heart pounding, stumbling backward into the aisle. A low hum vibrated through the plane. The lights dimmed again, this time with a reddish tinge. The screens across the entire cabin lit up, row after row after row, all showing the same thing. Their own homes. Living rooms, bedrooms, driveways. A few showed graves. The man turned to the person beside him, still frozen, eyes forward, but now tears ran down her cheeks. Her mouth moved slightly, forming silent words. Her screen showed a hospital bed. Someone was flatlining. The cabin darkened. Only the screens glowed. Outside the windows, there were no clouds, no lights, just a shifting red mist, thick and boiling like blood underwater. He looked back at his screen. The front door of his house was open again. This time, something else was walking through. Something that looked like him but wasn't. The whisper came like wind against the skin, no breath, just presence. Close to his ear. Time to go back. He turned so fast he nearly fell into the aisle. No one was there. No one should have been there. Everyone was still seated, heads tilted slightly forward, as if listening to a sermon only they could hear. He clutched the headrest for balance. The plane rumbled beneath him, low, irregular vibrations, like something massive shifting beneath the floor. The lights overhead flickered in sync with the noise. He looked up. The exit signs were gone. Not turned off. Gone. Smooth wall panels where they should have been. No arrows. No instructions. No way out. The whisper came again, behind him this time. You were supposed to stay. His mouth was dry. His legs moved on their own, carrying him down the aisle. He stepped around a woman slumped over her tray table, her hand still holding a plastic cup half full of orange juice that hadn't spilled. Not a drop. He made it to the back galley. The curtain was gone. So was the galley. It was just open, endless. A black hallway stretching far beyond the dimensions of the plane. He looked over his shoulder. The seats were empty now. He blinked. Every passenger was standing in the aisle, silent, still, all of them staring directly at him. Even the children, their faces slack, eyes blank, feet bare. And still, the whisper. "You shouldn't have left," a low chime echoed from the speakers. The kind that precedes a safety announcement, but this one was warped, stretched like a dying bell underwater. The door to the hallway began to pulse, just slightly, like it was breathing. He heard footsteps behind him, not walking, dragging. He turned again and saw himself, the same face, the same shirt, but wrong, too pale, too tall, no breath, no shadow. The thing smiled. Its mouth did not stop at the cheeks. "You woke up," it said, its voice not matching its lips. "But you never really left." Then the hallway swallowed them both in red. "Of course. Here's the next chapter," in the same tone and format. He stumbled back to his seat. Or maybe it wasn't his anymore. The rows all looked the same now, endless and wrong. But the window called to him. A small square of silence in all the chaos. He sank into the chair, the cushion oddly warm. Outside, the sky was black. Not night, not space, just the absence of everything. No stars, no wings, no horizon. He leaned forward, forehead nearly against the glass, squinting, and there it was. His reflection. But it didn't match. It was him, yes. Same hair, same shirt, same scar above his lip, but the head was tilted. Not quite wrong, but just enough. And then the reflection smiled. He didn't. He stayed frozen, breath fogging the pain. Then the reflection lifted a hand and waved. He hadn't moved. Slowly, deliberately, it nodded. Once, then again. A signal, an understanding. And then, its mouth opened. No words, no sound, just motion. Lips forming a phrase he couldn't hear, but somehow knew. Let go. The window began to darken. Not from outside, but within. A shadow blooming behind the glass. His reflection faded, replaced by something else. A shape, a face, maybe. Wide, wet, smiling too much. The cabin lights turned red. Seatbelts clicked. All around him, every single one. Fastened. He looked up. The passengers were back. All of them. Sitting perfectly straight, facing forward, hands on armrests. Every single face twisted into a knowing grin. A ding overhead. Then the intercom hissed alive. The voice of the pilot. Calm. Hollow. Final descent. Please remain seated. He turned back to the window. His reflection was still there. Only now it was outside, on the other side of the glass. Still smiling, still nodding, still mouthing. Let go. Certainly. Here's the final chapter. They found it in early spring. What was left of it? A hiker had spotted twisted metal in a thicket near the edge of a ravine, buried beneath decades of moss and silence. The paint had faded, but the numbers were still there, just enough to confirm what no one believed possible. That flight was never supposed to exist. No record in the airline's database, no departure time, no flight plan. And yet there it was, a fuselage snapped in two, seats overgrown with vines, tray tables curled and rotted like dead teeth. But what unsettled the search team most wasn't the plane. It was the lack of everything else. No luggage, no bodies, not a single sign that anyone had ever been inside. And still, every seat was buckled. The black box had been pried out, almost surgically, the cockpit intact. But the windshield was shattered inward, like something had come through, not crashed out. And on the captain's yoke, carved deep into the plastic, just one word: home. They ran tests on the materials. They dated the wreck. All of it pointed to a crash that should have happened years before that model even existed. The serial numbers didn't match any official registry. But somehow, there it was, sitting in a forest that had grown up around it, roots swallowing the wings like the earth had been trying to keep a secret. Forensics found no human remains, no blood, but every seat had hair embedded in the headrests, different colors, different lengths, none matching. And then there were the phones. Dozens of them. Old flip phones, newer models, all powered down, all still warm when found. Each one had a call log. Each one had made a call exactly at midnight, every night. Same number, same duration. No voicemail ever left. Authorities said it was a mass delusion, a hoax maybe, or an unregistered test flight gone wrong. But locals started calling the stretch of woods the landing site. They say if you walk near it after dark, you can hear the ding of a seatbelt light. And if you're quiet, you might hear the intercom whisper, "Welcome back.